Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the hush of a Viking longhouse. Yes, you padding in like you belong there, carrying only your curiosity and maybe a blanket you definitely didn't weave yourself. The air trembles with the warm shimmer of torchlight, and everything glows that deep amber color that makes you feel both cozy and slightly convinced something with horns might jump out at you. You hear soft crackles from a hearth you haven't even seen yet, and above you, rafters stretch like the ribs of an ancient creature. It's peaceful, but also a tiny bit intimidating. I mean, this is the Vikings we're talking about. You probably wouldn't survive this place without a decent shield, and at least 3 people who actually like you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening right now, tell me your location and what time it is for you. I love seeing how this little nighttime community spreads across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand just inside the doorway of the longhouse, your eyes adjusting. The threshold itself feels like a border not just between outside and inside, but between the modern world and one held together by timber, smoke, and stories. The Vikings built these longhouses with sturdy wooden posts, planks stacked horizontally like giant Lincoln logs that nobody had the heart to step on. Historically, we know many longhouses stretched up to 75 feet in length, sometimes even longer, big enough for extended families, servants, animals, and the occasional awkward guest who overstayed their welcome. Your boots, or whatever comfy socks you've got on, brush against packed earth sprinkled with straw. The scent is warm and rustic. Wood, smoke, wool, and something you're pretty sure is stew that's been simmering for 8 hours straight. Vikings didn't waste heat, so cooking happened near the central hearth, feeding both bellies and the architecture itself. Quirky fact for you: some archaeologists believe the smoke haze lingering in these longhouses acted as a kind of mosquito deterrent. That's right, medieval pest control powered by smoke gets in your eyes. As you breathe in, you feel the longhouse almost exhale back. The place is alive in its own way. Every board has swollen and contracted through brutal winters and bright midsummer heat. You step farther inside, and the torch sconces cast long, trembling shadows that look suspiciously like people having conversations. Just your imagination, but also kind of accurate. This longhouse has hosted generations. Weddings, funerals, arguments about goats, daring plans, quiet worries. Historians still argue whether longhouses function more like community centers or primarily as private homes, but most agree they were the heart of Viking life. You move deeper, and the first joke of the night pops up uninvited. You can practically hear someone whisper, "Mind the draft, Bjorn forgot to fix the door again." It's not your fault the place feels like a giant wooden thermos that never fully seals. Even in modern reconstructions, longhouses can leak cold air. But they were insulated surprisingly well, thanks to turf roofs layered thick with soil and grass. Imagine your house wearing a fuzzy green hat that also produces weeds you absolutely didn't ask for. A soft rustle sounds behind you just wind, or maybe the theatrical instincts of an old building showing off. You run your hand along one of the pillars and feel grooves where tools shaped it centuries ago. Vikings used iron axes and adzes to carve these beams, and there's something deeply human about the marks left behind. Slight unevenness. A place where someone corrected a mistake. A spot sanded smoother than the rest because maybe, just maybe, someone leaned there while telling an especially dramatic saga. You listen. Longhouses whisper in their own way. The acoustics make every creak sound like a memory replaying itself. Some researchers think the communal atmosphere helped preserve oral stories people gathered, listened, and corrected each other. No, that's not how Thor threw the hammer, you absolute cabbage. You imagine someone muttering lovingly. Your footsteps guide you toward the center, where the hearth glows low but steady. Heat warms your cheeks, and the firelight paints everything gold. Historically, this hearth represented protection, belonging, and life. Without it, winters could be deadly. And yes, the smoke got trapped under the roof beams before drifting out through a long, open smoke hole, giving you that campfire but indoors aroma that absolutely clings to your hair. You inch closer, hearing the gentle pop of resin in the burning logs. It feels timeless. You can easily picture a family gathered here. Parents mending clothing, children half asleep, someone poking the fire just because humans can't resist poking fires. One quirky tidbit? Some Viking households kept small personal objects like charms or decorated bone pieces hidden in the wall, planks, or under thresholds. Were they protective talismans, toys, secret emergency bead stashes? Historians still debate that too. As you lower yourself onto a wooden bench near the hearth, you feel the solid reliability of Viking craftsmanship. No nails here, most beams interlocked using wooden pegs and clever joints. You wiggle a bit, and the bench gives a small groan, like it's acknowledging your presence and judging your posture. Another soft joke nudges its way into your mind. Congratulations, you've just sat on furniture that predates the concept of lumbar support. But honestly, it feels comforting, like the Longhouse is welcoming you into a story older than your entire family tree. Your eyes drift around the space again, and the warmth, the shadows, the closeness of the ceiling, everything invites you to slow down. The modern world outside dissolves. Here, time feels syrupy and thick, stretching like the low smoke that curls above you. And here, in this softening glow, you feel the first whispers stories pressing at the edges, ready to share themselves as you move deeper into the Longhouse and deeper into Viking life. You shift your weight on the bench, letting the heat from the hearth sink into your bones before rising again, drawn deeper into the Longhouse. The threshold behind you fades into darkness, and ahead, the space stretches long and warm, almost like the building inhales and exhales around you. As you walk, the wooden floorboards give a soft, uneven creak, nothing dramatic, just the polite reminder of timber that's been doing its job for centuries. You can practically imagine it saying, "Careful, friend. I've seen 1,000 winters. Don't go stomping around like you own the place." The creakiness isn't surprising. Historically, longhouses were built on packed earth floors or simple planks laid over hardened soil. Vikings didn't luxuriate with polished hardwood flooring or ergonomic rugs with fun Scandinavian names, but their engineering was no joke. Buried support posts, overlapping plank walls, and cross-beamed roofs created structures that could endure savage coastal storms. Archaeologists have uncovered longhouses in places like Borg in Norway, where the construction was so impressive, modern engineers needed a minute. The place was basically the Viking version of a luxury lodge, minus the spa and fruit-infused water. You run your fingers along the nearest wall plank. It's warm from the fire's radiant heat and textured with centuries of expansion, contraction, and Vikings probably banging things against it for emphasis during stories. Here, the Longhouse begins revealing its layered past, not just physically, but emotionally. You get the sense that every argument, celebration, and awkward family moment still clings faintly to these timbers. Modern researchers try to reconstruct what daily life felt like here, but historians still argue whether the Longhouse served mostly as a functional shelter or as a dynamic social hub where everyone got mildly irritated with each other during long winters. You can almost hear a ghostly voice mutter, "We were both stopped making us choose," which feels fair. The truth is, these buildings were everything. Homes, workshops, storage, political centers, safe havens, gossip arenas, and occasionally arenas for actual fighting over who finished the dried fish stash. As you walk, you pass an area where the wall bows outwards slightly. Not dangerously, just the kind of swelling wood does after dozens of freeze-thaw cycles. It's humbling to think this place was built with tools simple enough to hang on your wall today, yet sturdy enough to last lifetimes. One quirky tidbit you recall. Some longhouse reconstructions include hollowed-out logs repurposed as indoor gutters for guiding drips or melted snow away from the living area. Practical? Absolutely. Also, the Viking version of, "Listen, we don't have plumbing, but we can fake it convincingly enough." The heat from the hearth follows you like a gentle dog, always present but never overwhelming. Vikings kept fires going constantly, not just for warmth, but for cooking, drying clothes, smoking meat, and providing light during the oppressive winter darkness. And yes, there was smoke, lots of it. The rafters overhead are darkened and shiny from resin and soot, though the glow from the flames gives them a reddish shimmer that feels both protective and a little eerie. You pause again and tilt your head upward. The rafters stretch like a wooden skeleton above you, each beam hand-shaped with iron tools. Historically, longhouses could have up to a dozen or more of these crossbeams, holding up a nearly 2-foot-thick thatched roof. That thickness insulated the home in winter and cooled it in summer. You marvel at the design, nothing about it is accidental. Everything is calibrated for survival in a landscape that didn't care whether you were having a good day. Another soft joke drifts into your mind. Look at you, admiring Viking architecture like you passed the building code inspection. It makes you smile, because the more you look, the more you realize just how meticulous these people were. They built with purpose, with efficiency, and with an intimate knowledge of the land. You step over a low wooden threshold inside the house, an inner divide marking off a section closer to the living area. The timber under your foot feels smoother here, worn by countless steps. Vikings often divided longhouses into zones: living quarters, animal stalls, cooking areas, storage corners. This inner threshold hints you're moving from the broad communal zone into the calmer domestic heart of the house. The warmth intensifies slightly. You're close to the central hearth now, the glowing anchor of everything. Flames lick upward, not too high, just a steady pulse, like the heartbeat of the home. Around the hearth, the packed earth is darkened from years of heat and spilled broth. You imagine children learning to walk here, adults cooking fish stews while gossiping, elders leaning on staffs and telling stories you'd give anything to hear firsthand. Historically, the hearth was considered sacred, connected to household deities like the Norse guardian spirits. In some sites, archaeologists have found small offerings buried near hearthstones, beads, carved wood, even bits of food. Whether these were ritual gifts, accidents, or someone trying to hide snacks from siblings, historians still argue. You suspect the longhouse keeps its secrets intentionally. The warmth washes over you, and you let yourself slow down. The world outside feels distant. The wind, the sea, the cold, it all stops at the thick wooden walls. This is what it must have felt like during storms. The longhouse holding firm like a loyal ship, the family gathered close, the fire giving them the courage to face another day. Nearby, a narrow bench carved from a single plank sits empty. You run a hand across it and feel faint grooves, knife marks, maybe from someone whittling late into the night. Vikings loved carving designs into everything: tools, beams, chests, combs, even spoons. It wasn't just decoration. Sometimes the carvings held protective meanings or simply served as a way to pass long winter hours. One fringe theory proposes that certain repetitive knot patterns carved into beams acted as mnemonic devices for oral storytelling. Whether true or creative speculation, historians still debate. It makes you look at every carved line with fresh curiosity. You continue walking slowly, letting each creak of the longhouse follow you like a companionable whisper. The place doesn't feel empty. It feels full of time, of memory, of people who once lived fiercely and loudly and left pieces of themselves in the architecture. As you move toward the next stretch of the longhouse, you realize the threshold you crossed wasn't just physical. It was an invitation, a gentle pull, deeper into Viking life, into the heart of a world built from wood, fire, and stories that refuse to fade. You drift farther into the longhouse, and the air changes in a way you feel more than see. The warmth of the hearth still wraps around you, but now it thins, rising, climbing, stretching upward in slow, smoky spirals toward the rafters. You follow it with your eyes, watching the smoke drift and curl like lazy, half-asleep spirits. If smoke had a personality, this would be the "I'll get there when I get there" type. Your gaze climbs higher until you're looking directly into the dim, wooden cavern above. It feels like staring up into the inside of a giant ship turned upside down, which isn't far off. Viking longhouses and Viking ships share that same ribbed, elegant structure. Historically, archaeologists have linked the two designs, noting how the curved walls and crossbeams reflect a culture obsessed with craftsmanship, balance, and survival at sea. Vikings basically invented a multi-tool architectural style. Good on land, good on water, good at supporting your roof through 40 consecutive snowstorms. The ceiling overhead is dark and almost black from centuries of smoke staining the wood. But there's also a gleam to it, a glossy sheen baked in by countless fires. Resin, soot, and time collaborate to create a kind of rustic varnish. You inhale again and taste a hint of smoke, earthy, ancient, and somehow comforting, like the world's most persistent incense. Historians still argue whether longhouse vents, that smoke hole running the length of the roof, actually worked well, or whether Vikings just accepted everything smelling like a barbecue for eternity. Based on the haze above you, your vote is firmly on they got used to it. But the rafters aren't just beams, they're storage. You see bundles hanging overhead, suspended by braided cords, herbs drying, ropes coiled neatly, maybe even fish stripped and cured. A quirky tidbit pops into your mind. Some excavations suggest that Vikings may have stored cheese up in the rafters to keep it away from pests. So, yes, you're standing under the Norse version of a pantry meets attic meets smoky cheese chamber. Try not to imagine a hard wheel of aged something falling on your head. Gravity has no mercy, and neither does dairy. Beneath the rafters, the longhouse feels different, more layered, more intimate. Smoke blurs the hard edges, softening the space. Silhouettes move in your imagination. Women tending stew pots, men sharpening blades on small whetstones, children darting through shadows, completely unfazed by the indoor fog. Kids don't care about air quality metrics after all. The air is warm near your face, but as you lift your hand slightly higher, you feel a surprising heat. That upper zone, just below the rafters, is like a secret climate system. Historically, this mattered. The smoke trapped up high helped preserve the timbers from mold and insects like an unintentional fumigation strategy created by necessity. If the Vikings had known how modern people pay money for sauna therapy, they would have nodded sagely and said, "Yes, we invented that too." You step closer to the center of the house, your gaze occasionally drifting upward again, drawn to the hypnotic dance of smoke. It threads through beams, around posts, and out through that long vent overhead. The vent, really just a gap in the apex of the roof, feels like a small, distant sky. A thin ribbon of outside air drifts down, cool and clean, meeting the warm smoke rising to greet it. The contrast is beautiful in an earthy, primitive way, like the house is breathing in cold nights and breathing out its own steady warmth. Under that opening, you notice the flicker of firelight painting patterns across the ceiling. Shadows stretch and distort, the rafters becoming the backdrop for a private shadow play performed by the flames. Some Vikings believed spirits could inhabit smoke household wights, ancestors, even trickster beings peeking through the haze. Whether they truly believed it or just pretended to for dramatic storytelling, historians still debate. But standing here, with the smoke swirling and whispering, you get why the idea makes sense. There's something alive about it. You take another step and hear the building speak again through small noises. Wood shifts slightly above you, a settling creak that sounds suspiciously like someone sighing in their sleep. The longhouse has weathered storms, seasons, and people. It knows how to bend without breaking. That kind of resilience deserves respect, or at least a gentle pat on one of the support posts, which you give it, hoping you look reverent and not like someone attempting to high-five a timber. As the smoke curls above, your mind starts piecing together how daily life worked in this atmospheric environment. Imagine waking up and the first thing you see is that smoky haze catching the sunrise filtering through the roof vent. Or imagine cooking over this hearth while the rafters sparkle faintly with resin. Some Viking homes even hung herbs, sage, juniper, yarrow, so the smoke would infuse them, making them smell heavenly, and maybe even adding mild preservative qualities. It's basically the ancient version of artisanal smoked herbs sold in fancy stores for too much money. You spot a small wooden ladder leaning casually against a support beam. Not tall enough for the roof, but enough to reach the rafters. Your inner voice whispers, "Please don't climb that." And you wisely agree. Vikings might have scrambled up there to adjust bundles or check tools, but you're here on a chill nighttime tour, not a surprise episode of Norse Ninja Warrior. Posing beneath the rafters, you let the sensory layers settle around you, smoke drifting lazily upward, woolen smells clinging to the air, the faint tang of iron tools resting nearby. Everything mixes into an aroma that is equal parts homely and epic. You marvel at how people lived, cooked, slept, worked, and argued right under this persistent haze. And you can almost hear the complaints, "My eyes are watering again," someone muttering. Or, if the smoke spirits wanted to say something useful, maybe they could tell us where the missing goats went. Weaving yourself deeper into the warm shadows, you feel the longhouse revealing more secrets. Smoke, beams, and time intertwine above you in a quiet symphony. It's a reminder that life here wasn't just functional. It was rhythmic, communal, sensory. Every day began and ended under these rafters, under drifting smoke that carried the smells of meals, the heat of stories, and the constant reassurance that the fire still burned. You linger in that softness. The smoke curls one last time, a ribbon of dusk caught in ancient architecture, and with each slow breath, you sink further into the longhouse's world. The rafters whisper old tales, and you listen, knowing more stories wait just beyond the warm reach of the fire. You ease yourself a little closer to the hearth, drawn by its glow the way a moth might drift toward a lantern, just with slightly more dignity and far less risk of spontaneous combustion. The longhouse shifts around you, warming your cheeks and tinting the world in deep honey gold light. This is the heart of the home, literally and figuratively, the magnetic center that held Viking life together through nights so long, the sun probably filed a missing persons report. You lower yourself onto a wooden bench, feeling its firm weight beneath you, and let the fire's soft crackles wrap around your ears. Flames lick upward in slow, mesmerizing arcs, illuminating the soot-darkened rafters above and casting dancing shadows along the walls. The fire doesn't roar, it murmurs. It's the kind of sound that instantly makes your eyelids heavier and your worries lighter, which you suspect is exactly why people gravitated here in the evenings. Imagine this. A Viking family clustered around this very hearth, children cross-legged near the sparks, adults reclining on carved benches, and maybe a wandering friend or a visiting trader soaking in the warmth while pretending they're not freezing under their fancy traveling cloak. This is where stories begin. This is where the longhouse breathes its longest, deepest sigh. You can almost hear voices layered over the crackling fire. Low murmurs, quiet laughter, the occasional snort when someone exaggerates a story a little too dramatically. And yes, dramatic storytelling was the entertainment for centuries. No screens, no podcasts, no rewatch this clip culture, just live performances powered by memory, charisma, and the ability to hold your mead without spilling it during a really good punchline. Historically, sagas and folktales weren't recited as formal theater. They were lived, shared, interrupted, corrected, teased, and passed down one evening at a time. Here, beside this very kind of fire, people told tales of creation and destruction, gods and monsters, victories, voyages, and that time someone's cousin tried to wrestle a seal because he mistook it for an insult from Loki. Okay, that particular story hasn't shown up in any archaeological reports, but you know something that silly happened at least once in history. Stories weren't just entertainment, they were social glue. They held communities together, taught lessons, shaped identity, and filled long, cold hours when the only alternative was staring into the fire and contemplating whether you'd washed your tunic this season. One mainstream historical fact you remember? Storytellers, or skalds, were highly respected in Viking society. They were memory keepers, chroniclers, and performers rolled into one, carrying lineages of poetry in their heads like walking libraries. Some fringe theories suggest that certain longhouses were designed acoustically, yes, acoustically, to help stories carry through the hall. Long, curved walls and central fire pits created natural echo chambers. Whether that was intentional or just a happy architectural accident, historians still debate. But sitting here now, listening to the way the fire subtly amplifies sound, you can imagine voices floating effortlessly across the room. Your eyes drift to the fire again. Flames shift from amber to orange to glowing blue at their core. Logs pop gently as sap pockets burst, sending tiny sparks upward into the haze. The warmth feels ancient, like you're sharing heat with generations of people who once sat exactly where you are, staring into the flames and suspending their worries for a while. Close your eyes for a moment, and you hear it. Soft, hushed voices from your imagination, shaping tales passed from elder to child. A gruff voice begins with something like, "Listen, you won't believe what Thor did next." And another cuts in, "Thor? Again? Can't we tell the one about the mischievous goats this time?" Then a child's voice, "No, tell the one where the giant gets tricked by the cow who..." And an older woman interrupts gently, "We'll get there. Let the fire settle first." And here's a quirky real fact. Vikings sometimes used firelight as a timing mechanism. Certain tasks like specific weaving patterns or metal heating were gauged not by minutes, but by how the flames behaved. "Wait until the fire settles" could mean give it 5 more minutes before we ruin the entire evening's work. Fire was a clock, a tool, a teacher, and a storyteller's spotlight. You notice the shadows on the wall lengthen and shrink, like stage actors responding to their cues. Each flicker feels like another character stepping forward in the ancient narratives. It's soothing and a little magical. You watch the fire glow brighter when the logs catch again, sending a warm breeze across your face. Above, the rafters hold the smoke like a patient old friend. Wisps drift through narrow beams of dim light coming from the smoke vent overhead. The longhouse seems to contain 2 worlds, the bright, warm realm around the hearth, and the darker, mysterious realm up in the rafters where smoke spirits, whether mythical or metaphorical, seem to swirl. You shift slightly, and your bench creaks a long, complaining groan that sounds remarkably like someone muttering, "I was having such a nice nap," before you moved. You pat the bench in apology and hear another faint creak that could be acceptance or further judgment. Hard to tell. Viking furniture wasn't known for subtle emotional communication. Still, you settle in, and you listen. The fire invites you to sink deeper into the moment, to feel the rhythm of life inside these walls. It's hard not to imagine stories unfolding all around you. A mother recounting the tale of Odin giving humans breath. A farmer telling a funny story about an ox that stubbornly refused to leave the river for 3 days. A shepherd whispering a frightening tale of the Draugr undead figures lurking in grave mounds. A young skald practicing a complex verse, stumbling over lines and starting again while an elder smiles knowingly. Historically, oral storytelling was the engine of Viking culture. Without it, sagas like the tales of Ragnar, Egil, and the Volsungs wouldn't exist in later written form. Stories evolved, grew, split, and braided themselves into new shapes over time. Historians still argue whether early stories were meant to be factual, symbolic, or something in between. But here, by the fire, you realize that distinction probably didn't matter. The point was connection, comfort, memory. You lean closer and feel the fire's warmth wrap around you like a wool cloak fresh from a drying rack. Crackles fill the air. Your breath slows. The longhouse fades into soft edges. It's easy to imagine lingering here for hours, nodding along to stories, adding your own quiet laughter, letting the firelight trick your eyes into seeing things that spark the imagination. The flames whisper on, subtle and persistent, as if telling you that this is just the beginning, that deeper stories, quieter moments, and hidden corners still wait for you in the longhouse's embrace. You rise from the hearth's glow with a soft sigh, the fire's warmth lingering on your cheeks as you step deeper into the length of the house. The longhouse stretches inward like a wooden tunnel of memory, and now your steps guide you toward the quieter edges where people slept, whispered, argued, dreamed, and if they were unlucky, snored loudly enough to rattle the roof beams. The lighting dims as you walk. Torches burn lower here, their flames flickering like little conspirators trading secrets. The longhouse floor becomes narrower, more intimate. The benches shift shape to fewer communal seats and more personal sleeping platforms lining each side of the central aisle. You drift toward the nearest one, running your fingers across the smooth edge of a plank polished by 1,000 elbows and restless nights. These benches double as bed seats by day, sleep stations by night, Viking efficiency on full display. Historically, these platforms often held straw, wool, furs, and whatever soft material people could scavenge or trade for. Think of it as the original convertible furniture set, just without the instructions that require 6 hours and a questionable Allen wrench. And, because the universe has a sense of humor, the straw sometimes came with resident insects. Congratulations! You've just met the Norse version of bedtime companions you absolutely did not invite. You lean in closer. The bedding smells faintly of lanolin, smoke, and something herbal, maybe dried meadowsweet or juniper placed beneath the straw. Some households added herbs to ward off pests or encourage pleasant dreams. A quirky tidbit. One excavation uncovered remnants of fragrant plants tucked into bedding, and scholars proposed it was either medicinal, spiritual, or simply because Vikings enjoyed things smelling less like wet goat and more like nature's potpourri. Historians still argue whether these plants were used deliberately or just tracked in accidentally by someone who fell into a bush earlier that day. You glance along the row of sleeping platforms, noticing how close they are to each other. Privacy, minimal. Comfort, moderate. Opportunity to overhear your neighbor complain about their cousin's fishing habits? Immense. The communal sleeping style meant families shared warmth, responsibility, and sometimes each other's midnight mutterings. You imagine trying to drift off while the person next to you sleep babbles about a chicken stealing their lunch. You'd get used to it, probably. You step sideways and sit at the end of one platform, feeling the wood give a gentle creak beneath your weight. It's surprisingly comfortable, or maybe you've just been softened by the fire's warmth and the longhouse's hypnotic atmosphere. The fur spread across it, soft, dense, and warm, invites your hand. Viking families slept under layers of wool and hide, bundled against winter cold that didn't care about your bedtime routine. Beside the bed, you notice something small tucked into a carved niche in the wall, a wooden charm shaped like a stylized horse, worn smooth from years of handling. Maybe a child's toy, maybe a talisman, maybe both. Vikings blurred the lines between usefulness and magic all the time. You give it a soft tap and whisper an apology in case it's the protective kind. The deeper you move along the sleeping spaces, the more you sense the landscape of nightly rituals. People settling in after long days, stretching beneath furs, whispering final stories or concerns, pulling children close, letting the fire's glow fade into softer red embers. The longhouse feels like it still holds these habits, like layers of sleep pressed into the wood. You pause near a wider section, slightly elevated, slightly more decorated, slightly more. I have authority, please respect my personal fur collection. This would have been the sleeping spot of the household head or an honored elder. Not quite a private bedroom, but as close to VIP seating as the architecture allowed. Here, the carvings on the wooden frame are more intricate spirals, knotwork, small animal shapes. Each pattern carries meaning: protection, lineage, craftsmanship, or just pride that your sleeping bench looks cooler than your neighbor's. The household's layout wasn't accidental. Sleeping areas were arranged with purpose. Younger children near parents, servants on the outer edges, visitors placed wherever there was room, sometimes too close for comfort, depending on how much garlic was in their dinner. One mainstream fact slides into your thoughts. Many Viking longhouses placed sleeping benches on raised platforms to reduce exposure to cold drafts and damp soil. Simple, smart, effective. A small draft slips under the plank wall now, brushing your ankle with a cool shiver. There it is. You think proof that even the best longhouses couldn't defeat Norwegian wind's lifelong commitment to inconvenience. You stretch your legs and continue walking along the sleeping row. The longhouse cracks and murmurs around you. Each sounds somehow softer here, like the building respects the fact that this is where people rested. The acoustics shift to muted, hushed. The walls seem to lean inward protectively, and you wonder if that's imagination or the structure settling after centuries of standing tall. Then comes a familiar comedic whisper, a voice in your head remarking, "Imagine being stuck listening to Uncle Bjarki snoring every winter night." And honestly, yes, you would absolutely invent earplugs if that were your nightly reality. Above you, the rafters loom lower, the smoke thinner here but still present. Everything feels closer, intimate. You can imagine what it was like to lie here at night, staring up at the ceiling, listening to the wind outside and the breathing of your family around you. Maybe you'd hear soft conversations fading into sleep. Maybe the creak of the roof reminded you of distant waves. Maybe you drifted off dreaming of voyages, gods, chores, or the stew you hoped tasted better tomorrow. One more fringe theory bubbles up, a scholarly suggestion that personal objects found near sleeping platforms indicate people maintained miniature shrines or symbolic tokens by their beds. Whether this was spiritual practice or just sentimental clutter, historians still debate. But the idea adds a sweet layer of humanity. Even fierce warriors needed a comforting token to hold on to before sleeping. You reach the end of the sleeping row and pause. The fire glows faintly behind you. Furs whisper softly under invisible weight, and the longhouse holds a silence warmed by memory. These benches, beds, and narrow boundaries weren't just furniture. They were the fabric of daily life, messy, shared, imperfect, but comforting in their closeness. A place where rest wasn't private, but communal, where warmth was shared, where the night crept in slowly and wrapped itself around everyone equally. You breathe in the layered scents, wool, wood, smoke, herbs, and feel the longhouse nudge you forward, deeper still, toward walls that have listened for centuries. You move beyond the final sleeping platform, feeling the acoustics shift again as the longhouse subtly opens its posture. The benches taper off, and the air grows cooler, less softened by the warmth of bodies and drifting dreams. Here, the structure transitions from a place of rest to a place of work, storage, planning, and quiet industry. This part of the longhouse often held the heartbeat of daily survival, even if it lacked the fire's glow and the comforting press of communal warmth. A beam overhead creaks softly, almost like a reminder. Pay attention. This is where the real work happened. As you step forward, the floor texture changes subtly beneath your boots. The central aisle narrows, then widens into a work zone that feels utilitarian, grounded, and purposeful. You notice a sturdy wooden table, low, broad, and scarred with knife marks and burn spots, each one a fossil of former tasks. Someone chopped roots here, someone carved wood here, someone trimmed thread or cut leather straps here. Thousands of tiny domestic decisions have left their signatures in this grain. You brush your palm across its surface and feel the ridges lift like runes. Not symbolic ones, just the casual script of daily living. To your right, a few storage chests squat under one of the angled walls, secured with simple wooden latches. You imagine someone kneeling to open one, rummaging for tools, valuables, spare cloth, herbs, or maybe something they don't want their neighbors borrowing. One mainstream fact slips into your mind. Viking Longhouses often stored their most precious items inside wooden chests that doubled as stools or tables. Furniture was multitasking long before flat-pack catalogs made the concept fashionable. A draft whispers in through a narrow ventilation gap near the roofline. This far from the fire, it has teeth. You pull your shoulders inward instinctively, mirroring what countless residents must have done in winter. The chill in this portion of the longhouse reminds you that comfort was always balanced with necessity. This wasn't the cozy zone of the building. This was the workspace that made survival possible. You notice a loom large, vertical, and draped with half-woven cloth. Viking weaving was a marathon, not a sprint, and the loom stands like a symbol of domestic power. Most textiles were produced inside longhouses, and the skill involved was staggering. People wove sails strong enough to carry ships across oceans, clothes warm enough to survive unforgiving climates, and decorative patterns beautiful enough to be admired centuries later. A mainstream but delightful detail nudges at you. Some Viking textile patterns include subtle symmetrical designs that appear almost modern, clean, geometric, elegantly simple, evidence that aesthetics were never an afterthought. You lean close. The warp-weighted loom uses stone weights tied to dangling threads, and one weight is carved with a tiny star shape. A flourish added by someone with enough pride, or boredom, to personalize a tool that no one but their household would see. You smile. That tiny star feels like a whisper from 1,000 years ago. Avon work deserves beauty. Nearby, a small pile of wooden tools rests in a low basket spindle whirls, bone needles, a knife with a handle polished by constant use. The glint of its blade catches the torchlight, creating a sliver of brightness in the dimness. Then you smell something unexpected, sweet, earthy, slightly sharp. You follow the scent and see a rack of drying herbs tied with twine. Yarrow, perhaps, or angelica, possibly juniper. Some were used for food, some for medicine, some for rituals, some because it smells nice and makes the place feel less like a barn. Thank you very much. Mainstream fact: archaeological finds from multiple sites show dried herbs stored indoors, likely used for culinary and medicinal purposes. You pause beneath the hanging herbs and breathe deeply, and for a moment the longhouse feels less like a historical structure and more like an active, breathing home. A creative but historically neutral theory drifts across your thoughts. Maybe certain herbs were hung near the work area, not just for use, but because someone wanted to mark this space as their own, like the longhouse's equivalent of putting a scented candle on your desk. The torches nearby flicker with a slightly bluer flame, reminding you that this is also the section where metalwork, sharpening, and small repairs might have happened. Large-scale smithing would be done outside or in separate structures, but a household always had minor tasks: fixing a loose rivet on a knife sheath, repairing a chain link, adjusting a buckle. You see a small anvil-like stone on a wooden block, and a hammer resting beside it, worn dark with soot. Further in, the wall curves slightly, and you follow it until you reach a corner where baskets are lined up like silent workers waiting for orders. You crouch beside them, inside. Dried fish, barley, turnips, and a few nuts. You imagine the rhythm of daily cooking, soaking, grinding, chopping, boiling, all of it done with limited light and layers of smoke from a fire that never fully stopped breathing. No wonder the residents probably developed astounding night vision or just learned to navigate by muscle memory. Another detail catches your eye on the far wall: a carved board with evenly spaced holes, possibly a game Nine Men's Morris or a Nefertafel. People played games inside longhouses, passing long winter nights with strategy, laughter, and hopefully not too much table slamming when someone's favorite piece was captured. You picture two people leaning over the board, grinning with competitive mischief while someone else pretends not to care but watches every move with silent investment. Domestic life wasn't all work. There was entertainment too: stories, songs, gossip, teasing. These walls must have heard thousands of jokes, some good, some terrible, some funny, only because the winter was long and options were limited. As you move deeper still, the noise of the fire becomes softer, like you're walking farther away from the heart of a large animal. The shadows stretch longer, and the torchlight seems thinner, but everything here remains vivid. A kettle with a cracked rim, a leather bag tucked neatly beneath a shelf, a wooden ladle hanging from a peg. This area, practical, grounded, essential, reveals the longhouse as more than just a communal hall. It was the engine room of ordinary life, the backstage where survival and routine were crafted day by day. In these corners, hands worked, minds planned, and futures were shaped in quiet hums and steady rhythms. You stand still for a moment, letting the weight of everyday history settle over you. Here, in the dimmer side of the longhouse, You can almost hear the gentle clatter of tools, the rustle of wool being drawn through fingers, the soft sigh of someone concentrating on their work. Everything today felt alive. And something ahead, something quieter, older, more symbolic, seems to wait patiently for you. Perhaps a threshold, perhaps a storage space with deeper meaning, perhaps a small shrine tucked into a shadowed alcove. Whatever it is, the path leads forward. A breath of cold air threads along the floorboards before you even register its source, sliding across your ankles like a curious cat made entirely of winter. You pause mid-step. The longhouse seems to inhale with you, timber tightening, rafters shifting, the faint echo of wind rasping along the outer walls. You angle toward the draft instinctively, drawn the same way generations before you must have been, checking for leaks, listening for storms, sensing that thin and stubborn line between safety and the world outside. The corridor narrows, leading toward a simple wooden door at the far end. Not a grand entrance, the main doorway is elsewhere, but a secondary exit used for quick checks on livestock or to haul in wood during snowstorms. A leather curtain hangs over it, stiffened by cold and age, its edges fused with old smoke and soot. You push it aside and feel the temperature drop with the decisiveness of a Viking chieftain delivering a verdict. The outside world presses close. A howl of wind swirls in, tugging your cloak and nipping your cheeks. You can almost imagine the snow drifting against the longhouse's outer walls, forming tiny ridges and ripples where the wind has carved patterns in the darkness. For a moment, you lean forward, letting the cold brush your face. The sensation is sharp enough to wake anyone from a mead-hazy evening. Behind you, the longhouse breathes warm air across your back like a hearth-warmed animal, nudging you not to wander too far. You step just outside, boots sinking into frosted earth. The sky above is a misty charcoal gray, the kind of darkness that refuses to fully commit to night. The wind picks up again, sweeping snow crystals into flickers of silver. You squint. Viking winters, you remind yourself, were not gentle. Even with the Gulf Stream offering mercy, the long nights, the storms, the relentless cold, they made the endurance of a longhouse not just admirable, but necessary. There's a mainstream historical fact swirling in your thoughts. Many Viking longhouses were partially insulated with turf or packed earth, helping them retain heat through brutal winters. The walls were not merely wooden, they were layered, reinforced, and deliberately sheltered. Smart architecture, not just rustic charm. You pull the leather curtain back into place and return fully indoors. The difference slams into you like a warm wave, your breath fogs then vanishes, your fingertips tingle, and your shoulders drop as the longhouse reclaims you. Behind you, the winter wind growls softly at the blocked doorway like a wolf denied entry. You move toward the central aisle again, and the warmth becomes more pronounced with each step. The floor radiates subtle heat where embers from the fire have drifted earlier in the evening. The closer you get to the hearth, the more intensely the contrast burns through you. You remember the faint cold in the work area you just passed through. But here, the glow rakes across your skin, yellow and soft, undoing winter's bite 1 degree at a time. A log collapses into a bed of coals with a sighing sound. Sparks leap upward, swirling through the smoky haze before disappearing into the rafters. People once sat exactly where you stand, returning from outside chores half frozen, tearing off mittens, rubbing their hands, grumbling about winds that never respected personal space. You smile. Some routines transcend centuries. You slide down onto a wooden bench beside the fire, letting the radiant heat reach your legs. The bench is polished smooth from countless bodies doing the same thing, warming, resting, thawing. A pot simmers over the fire, sending up the muted scent of broth. Maybe fish, maybe barley, maybe both mixed into a combination that someone claimed tastes better than it looks, and everyone else politely disagreed. You listen. The winter wind outside settles into a low whistle against the roof, weaving itself through the cracks in the timber. The longhouse responds with its own creaks, old bones adjusting to pressure, old beams groaning like seasoned storytellers. You angle your gaze toward the smoke hole above. Snowflakes occasionally drift through it, melting before they reach the ground. You imagine Vikings noticing the same thing, shrugging, and going about their night. The longhouse wasn't just shelter, it was a negotiating partner. Warmth in exchange for vigilance, light in exchange for tending, comfort in exchange for constant maintenance. A relationship built on mutual survival. A quirky detail rises in your mind. Some archaeologists believe that during especially harsh winters, families hung extra layers of woven cloth or animal hides inside the longhouse to trap heat more efficiently. Essentially, early insulation upgrades like the Viking version of throwing one more blanket over your drafty bedroom window. The idea delights you. You picture someone confidently announcing, "No, really, this hide will make it warmer," while another family member skeptically pokes at it. Historians still argue whether indoor drapery was purely practical or if some households used it to designate private corners. Either way, the longhouse begins to feel less like a relic and more like a real home with real debates. A sudden gust outside rattles something wood, a cart, a shield left leaning by the entrance. You tilt your head, listening. The longhouse seems to tighten its joints, hunkering down against the storm. You feel the instinctive shift inside your own body, like you're mirroring its bracing stance. The walls creak, but not with fear, more with familiarity. They've done this 1,000 winters before. Sitting beside the fire, you imagine what a winter evening must have looked like here in its prime. Families gathered close, children wrapped in wool, half listening to stories while fighting sleep. Adults mending clothes or sharpening tools. Someone stirring a pot. Someone else repairing a leather strap. A dog curled under a bench, shaking a dusting of snow from its fur. You rub your hands together, even though your fingers are warm now. The rhythm of the longhouse is settling into you, and with it comes a kind of quiet admiration for how people survive seasons that would send most modern folks sprinting back to central heating. You stand again, moving to a side wall. You press your palm flat against the timber. It hums faintly with cold from the outside, but the inner surface stays warm enough to touch comfortably. You imagine that on a particularly fierce night, someone else pressed their hand here checking for drafts, maybe even whispering a few hopeful words that the storm would pass quickly. A faint tapping catches your attention. It might be sleet. It might be a loose thatch reed trembling in the wind. Or, if you let your imagination slide just a little, it might be something older, a memory echoing its way through the wood, reminding you how many winters these walls have endured. The longhouse doesn't feel fragile against the winter. It feels stubborn. A stubbornness built from good design, tough materials, teamwork, and a dash of Viking attitude. You smile again. Of course it survived. And as the storm outside strengthens, you realize something. The deeper you go into the longhouse, the more it teaches you not by lecturing, but by letting you feel things. Temperature, sound, texture, memory. Something ahead calls you forward again. Not loudly. Just a subtle tug, like the warmest part of the longhouse wants to show you something else. You inhale, exhale, and follow. You follow the warm pull toward the center of the longhouse again, guided by the steady glow that grows brighter with each step. The smell changes first. Smoke gives way to something richer fat sizzling on hot iron, herbs softening in broth, spilled mead sweetening as it warms near the fire. Your stomach reacts before your thoughts catch up, tightening with a small twist that says, "Yes, please, I'll take whatever's cooking." Then sound arrives. Not the soft murmurs you've heard so far, but echoes faint, joyful, chaotic. The ghosts of a feast. Plates clattering. Someone laughing too loudly. Someone else shushing them, but not that seriously. The soft thump of a drinking horn set down just a little too aggressively. Probably after a dramatic story about wrestling a fish that definitely wasn't that big. You can almost hear the rhythmic pounding of a spoon against a pot, announcing food was ready. The central hearth expands here into a wide open space. Benches ring the fire like welcoming arms, turned inward so everyone would face the glow and each other. You step between them, feeling the longhouse stretch tall above you. You imagine the night of a midwinter feast, torches blazing in their wall brackets, the roof shimmering with rising heat, a kind of indoor sunset. A large cauldron hangs over the fire now, its metal darkened by lifetimes of use. You crouch near it, letting its warmth wrap around your face. Bubbles pop gently on its surface, sending up tiny sparks of scent turnip, barley, maybe a bit of dried fish. A standard Viking stew. If you're lucky, maybe an onion or two. If you're unlucky, maybe fermented something that someone swears tastes better after the fifth spoonful. You inhale, and the scent folds around you like a blanket. A mainstream historical fact drifts in. Archaeological sites have uncovered cooking pits and soot deposits in the exact center of longhouses, confirming the hearth wasn't just symbolic, it was the heart of food preparation, warmth, and social life. The hearth was everything. You imagine the bustle of mealtime long ago, someone ladling stew, someone else sharpening a knife for slicing bread, children underfoot trying to help, and mostly getting in the way, a dog sniffing around for scraps, adults discussing the day repairs to the thatch roof, the new fishing net, the neighbor's questionable decision to paint his shield bright yellow again, even though literally no one asked him to. You settle onto a bench, letting your hands drift over its smooth edge where thousands of fingers once rested. You close your eyes just briefly, letting the sensory mix of warmth and noise swirl into something almost tangible. The longhouse shifts around you just subtly, as if inviting you deeper into its memory. Then a new scent flickers past your nose. Mead, warm, honey, sweet, slightly fruity. You trace it to a wooden bucket on the far side of the hearth, fitted with a ladle and surrounded by reed-woven cups. Mead wasn't just available, it was essential. Not because everyone wanted to get pleasantly buzzed after a long day, but because fermented drinks were safer than water sometimes. Hydration with benefits. A quirky tidbit nudges your brain. Some Viking meads included herbs like bog myrtle, which gave a mild, spicy bite and occasionally a mildly hallucinogenic edge if someone got too enthusiastic with the seasoning. A drink that warms the belly and maybe makes you think you've solved the universe. Truly, a multitasker. You glance upward. The smoke hole above funnels out a column of haze that twirls like a pale spirit. Around it, the rafters collect soot in distinct patterns, each layer marking years of feasts, gatherings, and nights spent telling stories. If the soot were tree rings, you could probably date every great celebration held here. A sudden shift behind you, a faint scrape, makes you turn. The longhouse hums with a brief shiver in the floorboards. It's just the wind again, poking at the walls like an impatient guest. But it reminds you that feasts were often seasonal, timed to when the community needed morale most. Winter gatherings, harvest celebrations, farewells before voyages, returns after voyages, preferably with good stories and minimal injuries. Someone once stood exactly where you stand now and recited a saga with grand gestures, dramatically reenacting battles while someone else rolled their eyes and mouthed, "He's exaggerating again." A scholarly debate drifts through your thoughts. Historians still argue whether Viking feasting halls were significantly separate structures from longhouses, or if, in many rural areas, the longhouse was the feast hall. The truth probably varies by region, wealth, and how many people felt like squeezing into one space for the sake of salted fish and good storytelling. You move around the hearth, noticing details that hint at celebrations both ordinary and extraordinary. A horn carved with swirling knotwork lies on its side, the edges polished from hands lifting it in countless toasts. A clay bowl sits cracked on the ground, broken in moments of clumsy excitement, perhaps. A wooden spoon has scorch marks on its handle, proof someone once rested it too close to the fire because they were busy chatting. You brush your fingers along a wide serving platter with shallow grooves carved into its surface. You can picture slices of roasted meat arranged upon it, maybe goat, maybe pork, maybe a surprisingly nice fish someone hauled in on a good day. You imagine steam rising from it, kids bouncing in anticipation, adults pretending they're not equally excited. Beside it sits something unexpected. a tiny wooden figurine of a horse. Not large, not fancy, but worn smooth. You pick it up. Maybe a child dropped it during a feast, or maybe an adult carried it as a lucky charm. Hard to say. But it feels like a whisper from someone who lived here. A small echo preserved in wood. You set it back gently. The longhouse opens around you with a strange warmth, not just physical but emotional. You can feel the communal pulse here. The moments where the household laughed, argued, toasted, ate, and occasionally spilled something that probably stained the floor for months. You picture a winter feast now. Torches flaring, voices rising, the roof trembling as wind hammered outside. People huddle close, sharing warmth and stories. Someone sings off-key, but with enthusiasm. Someone else bangs a drum badly, but no one cares because it's loud and joyful and pushes the dark away. The longhouse was a shield against loneliness as much as against weather. And as you sit there, letting the imagined feast play out around you, the fire crackles like applause. The air thickens with warmth, the smell of stew drifts by, and somewhere in the rafters a faint ember sparks upward, illuminating the shadows. Something else waits further down the longhouse, quieter than this lively center, but no less important. A place where industry hums and stories whisper through tools and textiles. You stand. You breathe in. You follow the next pull into the deeper parts of the longhouse. You drift toward the quieter edge of the longhouse, where the glow of the central hearth fades into a gentler amber haze. The warm riot of feasting echoes melts behind you, replaced by the soft hush of industry steady, rhythmic, patient. As you walk, the floorboards beneath your feet feel smoother, polished more by the gentle shuffle of boots than the stamping, dancing chaos of celebrations. You're heading somewhere purposeful, somewhere where hands shape the fabric of everyday life, quite literally. The weaving corner waits. You see it before you fully reach it. A tall, imposing, warp-weighted loom standing like a wooden sentinel, its frame silhouetted against a patch of softer firelight. Wool threads cascade downward in neat vertical lines, weighted by rounded stones tied with braided cords. Those stones, simple, ordinary, might be some of the most hard-working objects in the house, holding tension day after day, season after season, like little anchors of civilization. You step closer, drawn by the subtle sway of the hanging threads. Even now, unmanned, the loom seems alive, as though the fibers continue whispering the muscle memory of the hands that work them. A faint smell of lanolin lingers, the earthy, waxy scent of raw wool. It's comforting in a rustic, cozy, I definitely need to wash my cloak later kind of way. On a small bench beside the loom rests a basket filled with carded wool, soft and fluffy, like clouds someone forgot to put back in the sky. You run your fingers through it. It yields instantly, warm and pliant. The Vikings relied heavily on wool clothing, blankets, sails. Wool kept the cold from creeping bone deep. A mainstream historical fact settles into your thoughts. Viking women were responsible for producing the sails that powered longships, and each one required miles of spun, yarn, and months of unbroken labor. Entire voyages, raids, trade journeys, explorations depended on corners of longhouses like this one. Your fingertips brush a spindle lying nearby, smooth and balanced. Someone used this exact spot to spin yarn, twisting fibers rhythmically, hour after hour. You picture a woman sitting straight-backed on the bench, her hands moving almost automatically while she chatted with someone or quietly listened to the house's heartbeat. A soft clacking sound pulls your attention. No one is weaving, but you can imagine how it once sounded. The thud of the beater bar, the shuffle of feet adjusting tension, the gentle scrape of weights tapping against the wood as the warp threads shifted. That repetitive rhythm must have woven itself into the longhouse's identity as much as the smoke, the laughter, and the winter winds. You glance upward. On a small shelf above the loom, skeins of dyed wool hang like a collection of soft jewels, deep red, muted blue, moss green, sunny yellow. Their colors glow faintly in the torchlight. You can't help but smile. Vikings were not the grim, colorless warriors pop culture sometimes paints them to be. They loved color. A lot. They used plants, roots, and even certain lichens to produce beautiful dyes. A quirky tidbit surfaces in your thoughts. One dye, extracted from an insect, produced a brilliant red that became a status symbol. It took an absurd number of insects to make even a small amount of dye, so anyone wearing that shade was basically flexing ancient world luxury. The original rare drop. You shift your gaze as a faint rustle teases your ear. It's not from the loom, it's from a smaller corner just beside it. A low stool, a spindle whorl, a bundle of flax hanging from a peg. Linen, too, played a role in Viking households. Cool, breathable, and perfect for underlayers. The flax bundle brushes lightly in the draft, whispering against the wall like a restless curtain. You crouch to study a bone needle tucked into a small wooden box. Its eye is carefully carved, perfectly smooth, polished by years of use. Someone used that needle to stitch seams on tunics and cloaks, hems on table coverings, perhaps even sails. You can imagine the careful precision leaning close, squinting in dim light, fingers working stitches so small and neat they would last for years. Behind you, the longhouse creaks again, shifting as the wind presses against it. The sound isn't alarming, it's more like a stretch, a yawn, as the old beams settle into place. The movement makes the hanging warp weights clink softly together, adding an accidental percussive shimmer to the moment. You sit on the weaving bench for a moment, letting the warmth of the loom corner wrap around you. It's quieter here, softer. Less dramatic than the feasting area, but somehow more intimate. You realize that life in the longhouse wasn't all roaring fires and heroic sagas. Most of it happened in corners like this, spaces where ordinary work shaped extraordinary survival. You imagine a winter afternoon here, the storm raging outside while someone wove cloth with steady focus. Maybe she hummed, maybe she sighed, maybe she whispered a few choice words when the yarn snagged nothing too inappropriate, because it's still PG-13 inches, this imagination. But possibly the Viking equivalent of, oh, come on. A scholarly question nudges your thoughts. Historians still argue whether weaving was strictly women's labor or if men participated more during certain seasons or voyages. Evidence leans one way in some regions and another way in others, leaving room for nuance and debate. But here in this longhouse, you sense many hands contributed when necessary. You rise again, brushing stray wool fibers from your cloak, and examine a small wooden box tucked beneath the loom. Inside lie beads, glass, amber, bone each one tiny, beautiful, and slightly mismatched. Maybe someone planned to sew them onto a tunic. Or maybe a child played with them before bed, hearing stories while little fingers threaded beads into strings. You turn one bead over in your fingers. Amber, warm to the touch, formed from ancient resin. A tiny sun caught inside a pebble. Vikings treasured amber, traded for it, crafted with it. Holding it now, you feel a mild thrill like you're touching time itself in pocket-sized form. Setting the bead back gently, you stand and stretch. The weaving corner hums with quiet meaning. It tells a story of skill and labor, of patience and artistry, of work so essential that without it, the entire Viking world would unravel literally. You step backwards slowly, still facing the loom. The threads shimmer softly in the firelight, and for a moment they almost seem to sway as though someone invisible continues the pattern. The longhouse remembers. The work lives on, even in silence. A soft draft brushes your back, reminding you that the longhouse is bigger still, that more secrets wait deeper inside. The loom corner has shown you the heartbeat of daily craft, but ahead lies another part of the house, one with its own chorus of sounds and scents. You turn toward that faint hint of animal musk, straw, and warmth, the stable end of the longhouse. It's waiting. You drift toward the far end of the longhouse, where the wooden floorboards give way to a rougher, straw-strewn section. The ash shifts immediately warmer, slightly damp, and tinged with the earthy perfume of hay and livestock. This is the stable area, the place where animals rested, breathed, and occasionally snorted in ways that made you suspect they were commenting on human foolishness. You inhale deeply. The scent is oddly comforting, grounding you in the practical heartbeat of Viking life. Cattle, sheep, goats, maybe even a pig or two, these animals weren't mere companions. They were survival incarnate. They provided milk, meat, wool, labor, and even occasional social currency. A mainstream historical fact slides into your thoughts. Many longhouses were designed to include this integrated livestock area, reducing the need for separate barns and allowing body heat from animals to help warm the living spaces. Basically, your cows doubled as radiators. And if you ever get a little too cozy with modern central heating, just remember the original multitaskers had hooves. A faint shuffle ahead makes you glance toward a low-hanging beam. A goat lifts its head from the straw, amber eyes catching the firelight from the central hearth. It blinks slowly, chewing on hay like it knows something you don't. Possibly your future, probably just its breakfast. You watch as the animal stretches, shifting its weight, a small exhalation misting in the cold indoor air. The smell is pungent but comforting in that this is home kind of way. You step carefully along the narrow aisle between the sleeping platforms and the animal area. The straw crunches softly under your boots. You notice scuff marks, hoof prints pressed into the bedding, and tiny indentations where animals once lounged. Life here wasn't pristine. It was functional, messy, and incredibly alive. A quirky tidbit rises to your mind. Some excavations suggest Vikings sometimes allowed animals inside as a form of security. Yes, livestock indoors deterred burglars because who wants to sneak in while being headbutted by a goat at midnight? Historians still argue whether that was intentional or merely an efficient accident of necessity, but it's fun to imagine a Viking heist foiled by a particularly grumpy you. The ceiling above you darkens again with smoke from the hearth, and a faint draft whispers through the roof vent. You notice how the warmth radiates outward. Near the stable, the air feels slightly cooler but still livable, aided by the heat of huddled animals. Every creature in this portion of the longhouse contributes to a delicate balance. You almost expect a cow to nudge a human in gentle reproach if they linger too close to the feed trough. You crouch down beside a low wooden feeding box. Inside are remnants of grain and root vegetables. Imagine a small Viking child kneeling here, feeding a goat while an elder recited a story about sea monsters in distant lands. Work and play, duty and imagination, woven together seamlessly. That's the rhythm of life here. A soft scratching sound draws your attention. A small, wiry dog emerges from the shadows, tail wagging lazily. Dogs were multifunctional too, guards, companions, hunters. This one sniffs your boot, then curls under a bench, satisfied with the human intrusion. You can almost hear its thoughts. You're fine. Keep walking, but don't touch my spot. Above, rafters and smoke seem lower here, condensed by the heat and activity below. The longhouse's design is brilliant, elevating sleeping and work areas while corralling animals in a semi-separated zone. That allowed humans to survive in relative comfort without sacrificing livestock needs. You run a hand along a nearby post and feel its grain, darkened by centuries of handling, cleaning, and the occasional stray hoof. You notice a small trough carved into the floor for water. Ingenious in its simplicity, animals stayed hydrated indoors without wandering into human spaces, and waste was somewhat managed. A fringe tidbit surfaces. Some archaeologists suggest the presence of these troughs influenced social gatherings. Perhaps the smell dictated where people ate or slept. Historians still debate whether sensory management was intentional or simply an unavoidable reality of close quarters. The stable corner hums with quiet life. The animals shuffle, settle, snuffle, and occasionally stamp, a subtle percussion accompanying the longhouse's evening symphony. It's intimate, grounding, and strangely rhythmic. You imagine evenings here, children laughing as a goat snatches a stray scarf, adults kneeling to stroke an animal's back, the hearth's warmth extending even this far into the longhouse. You notice a pile of hay near the far wall, slightly disheveled. Perhaps someone stacked it hastily, or maybe it was a favorite lounging spot for the cows. It smells sweet, earthy, familiar. You kneel to pick up a stray piece, letting it crumble lightly between your fingers. The texture is rough, but pliant. This is survival in tactile form, literally hands-on living. Looking around, you realize that every object here serves multiple purposes. Posts for structure, benches for sitting or sleeping, beams for storage or support, animals for warmth or sustenance. Life is integrated, seamless, almost like the building itself is alive. It breathes, shifts, accommodates, and teaches. You rise and step toward the partition that separates the stable from the more domestic sections. A draft from outside brushes your cheek. The longhouse exhales softly, inviting you onward, deeper into the architectural rhythm. Ahead lies a space quieter than the feast hall, less tactile than the weaving corner, but no less vital. The sacred or symbolic end of the house. You follow the gentle pull, the hum of the animals fading behind you, heartbeats and hooves blending into memory. Something waits just beyond the part of the longhouse where belief, ritual, and daily magic quietly intertwined. You pass the last stable post and step into a zone that feels subtly different. The air is still, almost reverent, as if the longhouse has pulled in a quiet breath just for this section. There's no smell of animals or stew, no clatter of tools or laughter. Instead, a faint trace of incense or perhaps crushed herbs lingers, whispering through the smoke-tinted light. This is the symbolic heart of the house, where everyday life brushed against something larger, something unseen. Your eyes adjust, and you notice small alcoves carved into the timber walls, shallow shelves holding objects both familiar and mysterious. A carved figure of Thor's hammer, a worn amulet of amber and bone, a tiny wooden bowl polished by careful hands. Perhaps a small vessel held water, wine, or ritual oils. Maybe it was a gift for the gods, or a token of gratitude for survival. Archaeological digs have uncovered similar domestic shrines called herger or votive spaces tucked into the longhouses of Northern Europe. Mainstream historical fact. Vikings combined domestic spaces with subtle spiritual practice, blending sacred and everyday in a way that modern homes rarely do. You crouch, brushing your fingers lightly over the smooth surface of one shelf. The amber glows faintly, catching what little light filters from the central hearth. Someone, perhaps a mother, a grandmother, or the household head, arranged these items meticulously, each with purpose. A fringe tidbit surfaces. Some scholars suggest Viking household shrines contain charms for fertility, protection from evil spirits, or even luck in trading voyages. Historians still debate whether these were active religious objects or symbolic decor meant to reinforce community identity. A quiet hum rises in your chest as you imagine past rituals. A soft chant, a whispered blessing over children or livestock, a nod to the gods for favorable weather or bountiful harvests. Maybe someone left a small offering of food on the shelf, knowing the next person would see it and understand the gesture without question. You step closer to a low bench beneath one of the alcoves. The surface is worn, polished, smooth, evidence of repeated kneeling or sitting. Perhaps this is where someone would pause during morning chores to whisper a small prayer before heading out to tend the livestock or weave wool. Perhaps they spoke to ancestors. Perhaps it was simply a quiet moment of reflection, unnoticed by the rest of the bustling household. You notice a small, intricately carved wooden disc resting against the wall. Its pattern is geometric, spiraling inward, like the path of a meandering river. Holding it, you can almost sense its past. It might have been a token of good luck, a meditation focus, a playful carving by a child left behind for an adult to discover. The ambiguity delights you. It feels alive because it resists certainty. Above, the rafters bend slightly, dark with smoke, yet soft with accumulated centuries of warmth. The longhouse seems to lean in, protective and observant. You imagine tiny lanterns or candles once lit in these alcoves, flickering against walls adorned with symbolic carvings. Shadows would dance in silent rhythm with whispered prayers, blending domesticity with ritual, survival with reverence. You notice faint scratches along the floor near the alcoves, evidence of repeated footsteps, of ritual or routine. Someone pacing as they whispered intentions. Someone kneeling repeatedly to adjust an offering. Someone tracing patterns with a finger in the dust. You can almost hear the quiet shuffle of wool, the murmur of prayers, the sigh of wood under weight, each sound preserved in memory. A scholar's debate drifts into your mind. Historians still argue whether such domestic shrines were genuinely sacred spaces or performed a psychological function, reinforcing order and family cohesion. You think both are true. The Longhouse seems to embody a practical, yet imbued with meaning. A faint, almost imperceptible draft brushes your ear. You lean in and listen. The space hums with patience, with quiet continuity. A small offering dish tilts slightly, as if nudged by centuries of devotion. You can almost imagine an elder whispering, "May we be protected. May we prosper. May the winds be gentle on our voyages." Some fringe evidence hints that Viking households may have performed small divinations here, casting lots, drawing symbols in dust, or consulting talismans. Whether routine or exceptional, the thought adds a layer of mystique to the space. You settle onto the low bench, letting the subtle warmth of the hearth drift across your back. The smell of herbs mingles with fading smoke. Every object, every mark, every shadow seems alive with memory, reminding you that the Longhouse is more than timber and thatch. It's a vessel for human intention, care, and devotion. The ambient sounds of the house, the occasional creak, the low murmur of the fire, the far-off scrape of a tool fade into a kind of lullaby. You breathe slowly, attuned to the rhythm of life preserved in this sacred corner. A soft smile crosses your face. You feel the invisible thread connecting generations. Hands that worked, blessed, prayed, or simply paused here, leaving traces that persist in scent, texture, and memory. The Longhouse hums around you, protective and patient, and quietly invites you to move onward again. Ahead lies another layer, private spaces tucked into corners, hidden corners of daily life, and intimate zones where small details tell the largest stories. You rise. The sacred end of the house has whispered its secrets. Now, it's time to explore the quiet domestic corners where people lived, loved, and prepared for another long winter. You step away from the hushed alcoves and move toward the small, tucked-away domestic corners that balance the Longhouse's life. These areas are neither the central hearth, nor the loom corner, nor the livestock section. They exist in quiet liminality, where daily routines unfold with minimal spectacle but maximum importance. You notice immediately how the floor here is dustier, slightly uneven, bearing tiny grooves where baskets were dragged, stools shuffled, and feet scuffed over decades. A faint, sweet tang of grain rises from a low cupboard built into the wall. Barley, oats, and a few dried beans rest inside, nestled in sacks and woven baskets. Viking families had to manage food meticulously. Surplus was rare, spoilage disastrous, and winter long. Mainstream historical fact, storage areas in longhouses were carefully designed for airflow and protection from pests, sometimes raised off the ground on wooden planks or stone slabs to keep grains dry and safe. You kneel to inspect a small basket of nuts, noticing shells cracked open and tiny fragments of husk clinging to the edges. Perhaps a child cracked them for a snack while listening to a story, or an adult was preparing a simple addition to a winter stew. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some Viking households reportedly stored small hidden treats in unusual containers to surprise children or perhaps even adults during the long, dark nights. Historians still argue whether this practice was widespread or just a charming exception. Alongside the cupboard, you see a shallow wooden tub with hardened traces of clay and soot on its edges. Someone once used it for washing vegetables, kneading dough, or even preparing small fish before cooking. The multiplicity of use fascinates you. Every object is versatile, every space adaptive. You run your fingers over the wood, worn smooth, as though centuries of human hands pressed, lifted, and scrubbed against it in repetitive, comforting rhythm. Nearby, a low bench serves dual purpose: seating for quiet meals, preparation work, or simply a resting spot after hauling firewood from the outside. You notice small nicks in the surface, grooves worn by knife blades or utensils. Someone, likely a cook or child in training, scored the wood while preparing meals, leaving behind the tactile equivalent of a diary. A faint scent of herbs lingers here as well, though subtler than the alcove or hearth. Dried parsley, thyme, or perhaps a sprinkling of juniper. Vikings were pragmatic with plants. Culinary, medicinal, and magical functions sometimes overlapped. Fringe theory: small bundles of herbs in domestic corners might have been used to ward off pests, improve sleep, or subtly bless the household. Historians still debate the exact intent behind these ritualized domestic practices. You shift your attention to a small, hand-carved ladle resting on a shelf. It is light, elegant, and clearly used for both serving and stirring. Every curve has been polished by decades of practice. You lift it gently, imagining someone measuring grains for a morning porridge, pouring soup over fresh bread, or stirring the stew you glimpsed earlier near the hearth. You can almost hear the subtle clink against the pot, punctuating a quiet domestic symphony. A tiny pair of wool socks, frayed at the edges, lies crumpled beneath the bench. The remnants of children's clothing hint at daily life unfolding on a scale invisible to larger history. Someone tugged these on hurriedly before a long walk to fetch water, or pulled them off quickly to avoid wet snow at the stable. The personal traces speak loudly. You notice a faint groove along the floor, leading to a corner where a small spinning wheel once rested. Unlike the warp-weighted loom, this portable tool allowed someone to process fibers more spontaneously, perhaps while supervising children, attending the hearth, or listening to an elder tell a tale. The wheel, you imagine, was a hub of concentration and quiet meditation, producing essential yarn while thoughts wandered freely. Above, the rafters here sag slightly, carrying centuries of dust and soot, but they also frame the space, sheltering it, defining it, lending it subtle intimacy. Sunlight or firelight would have fallen just so, creating patches of brightness where daily tasks were easiest. Shadows from the beams likely traced the slow movement of hours, marking time gently and visually for anyone awake before the Sunday. A subtle creak in the timber makes you glance upward. It is not threatening, merely the sound of an ancient house adjusting to the weight of its history. You imagine families listening to the same creaks, weaving them into lullabies, cautionary stories, or background hums for concentration. Nearby, a small collection of wooden bowls and ceramic fragments lies tucked against the wall. You kneel to inspect them. Some show deliberate decorative carvings. Others are utilitarian, polished smooth by years of use. A child might have chipped one accidentally. An adult likely smiled indulgently or repaired it. The interplay of care, use, and imperfection feels alive. A fringe tidbit catches your attention. In some Viking households, it's theorized that certain everyday objects were intentionally placed in lucky arrangements to prevent misfortune. A bowl here, a bundle of herbs there, a subtle pattern invisible to outsiders but meaningful to the household. Historians still debate whether such practices were superstitious or deeply ingrained domestic routines. You rise, brushing crumbs from your knees, and step back to survey the corner. The domestic space feels alive in a quiet, understated way. It is not theatrical, not dramatic. It is the engine room of survival, the rhythm of everyday existence, the heartbeat of private life that underpins the more celebrated feats of Viking history. You breathe slowly, inhaling the mixed scents of wood, straw, herbs, and faint remnants of cooked food. This corner, with its modest tools and subtle warmth, speaks volumes about the ordinary yet extraordinary details that sustained life here. You can almost hear centuries of small, unremarkable gestures echoing softly, stirring, chopping, kneading, sorting, folding. The Longhouse has allowed you to feel its pulse, And in this quiet domestic alcove, the rhythm slows, intimate, patient, and steady. But deeper still, a section remains where communal, individual, and sacred intersect, where people prepared not just for survival, but for memory, celebration, and rest. You straighten, knowing the next step will lead you to spaces that connect work, sleep, and ritual in ways the Longhouse has been quietly preserving for centuries. You leave the quiet domestic corner behind, stepping into the transitional space that links work, storage, and living areas with the more personal, intimate corners of the Longhouse. The air here feels layered, a blend of warmth from the hearth, the faint tang of herbs from the weaving section, and the earthy undertone of the livestock area. Every inhale carries the complexity of domestic life compressed into timber, smoke, and straw. Your eyes drift along the walls, where small hooks and pegs hold everyday necessities: wooden ladles, bundles of flax, leather straps, and folded textiles. The organization is deceptively simple, nothing extravagant, but everything within reach. Viking ingenuity thrived on practicality, and the design of this space reflects a culture attuned to efficiency. A mainstream historical fact floats into your awareness. Longhouses often had multiple functional zones within a single hall, with the spatial arrangement intentionally guiding daily activities while minimizing cross-contamination of work, sleep, and food preparation. You crouch beside a narrow shelf holding a small collection of domestic artifacts. A carved wooden comb, polished smooth by generations of use, rests next to a tiny clay cup. You imagine hands large, small, weathered, delicate reaching for these items daily. The comb could have been used for hair, for wool, or even as a rudimentary tool to separate flax fibers. Fringe evidence. Some researchers speculate that combs found in longhouse contexts may have doubled as simple talismans against misfortune or evil spirits. Historians still argue whether these multifunctional objects held ritual significance or were purely utilitarian. The floor beneath your feet dips slightly, hinting at a subtle threshold, a transition point that marks the beginning of the more private areas. Here, the longhouse's rhythm slows. The public hustle of work and communal activity gives way to corners designed for reflection, rest, and preparation. You follow the subtle incline, feeling the weight of centuries of footsteps pressed into the timber. A faint scent of smoked meat and dried herbs drifts from an adjacent nook. You peek inside. Small bundles of cured fish and meat, tied neatly with twine and stored on elevated racks. The preservation of food was essential to survival, particularly through long, harsh winters. Viking ingenuity once again shines. Smoke, salt, and cold were combined to extend edibility while maintaining flavor. You pause to imagine a family gathering around these preserved stores, each member adding to the ritual of rationing, tasting, and planning. Your gaze settles on a small, carved figurine tucked into a corner of the shelf. Its features are weathered but recognizable: a stylized animal, perhaps a bear or a horse, representing protection, strength, or household prosperity. You lift it gently, feeling the warmth of the wood beneath your fingers. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some longhouse figurines appear intentionally worn from frequent handling, suggesting they served as comfort objects or lucky charms rather than mere decoration. Historians still debate whether their primary purpose was symbolic, practical, or a mix of both. Above you, the rafters arch low, creating a cocoon-like effect. The ceiling seems almost to lean inward here, inviting you to slow your pace, lower your voice, and listen closely. You hear a faint creak, then the soft murmur of imagined past voices. Someone measuring grains, someone else softly singing a lullaby, a child whispering a story to a sibling. These walls carry memory, not just of events, but of rhythm, intention, and domestic heartbeat. On the far side of this transitional area, a shallow bench runs along the wall. Its surface is worn and polished, with small gouges and scratches marking years of use. You imagine sitting here to rest between tasks, quietly observing life in motion. A loom operator spinning fibers nearby, a child snacking on dried fruit, an adult tending the hearth. Every scrape and dent tells a story of touch, presence, and continuity. A small bundle of dried flowers lies tucked into the corner of the bench, possibly a simple decoration, perhaps a token of ritual or memory. You inhale lightly sweet, faintly herbal, comforting. It reminds you that even amidst the practical, everyday work, there was space for beauty, attention, and intention. You rise slowly, stretching as the subtle warmth from the hearth and the lingering sense of the weaving and domestic corners mingle. The longhouse seems to guide you gently forward towards spaces reserved for more intimate moments. Family interactions, private reflection, and the overlapping domain of ritual and everyday life. Ahead lies the personal quarters, simple, practical, yet filled with quiet richness. Here, the longhouse whispers of intimacy, privacy, and the subtle details that shaped every night and every dawn. You step forward, ready to explore how Vikings lived not only to survive, but to exist fully in the intimate spaces of their homes. You move into the private quarters of the longhouse, where the noise of activity, the shuffle of tools, and the sense of cooking gradually fade into something softer, more personal. The floorboards here are smoother, polished by feet that tread lightly in these intimate spaces. You notice small sleeping platforms, each raised slightly from the floor, layered with straw, animal hides, and woven mats. The layout feels deliberate. Each family member had a defined space, yet all were connected by the shared warmth of the central fire. You step onto a platform, running a hand over the straw. It is rough but yielding, the texture softened by use and time. Mainstream historical fact. Viking longhouses often incorporated these raised sleeping platforms to improve insulation and reduce contact with the cold, damp floor. Imagine the practicality: fewer drafts, warmer nights, and slightly elevated status for the occupants. A faint, lingering scent of herbs tickles your nose, juniper, yarrow, and maybe a hint of mugwort. Vikings tucked these into bedding for scent, comfort, and possibly insect deterrence. Fringe evidence. Some scholars argue that certain herb combinations in sleeping areas had ritualistic or protective purposes, warding off spirits, bad dreams, or misfortune. Historians still debate whether these were primarily practical, symbolic, or both. A small, carved box sits near the head of one platform. Inside, you imagine tiny treasures, beads, small tools, or tokens left by loved ones. These items carried both practical and emotional weight, objects of daily utility and personal significance. You run your fingers along the smooth wood, feeling the faint warmth left by centuries of hands before you. On the wall above, faint scorch marks suggest the occasional candle or torch placed to cast light for reading, sewing, or quiet reflection. The Vikings, practical as they were, knew the value of illumination for safety and ritual alike. A small, hand-carved figurine rests on a nearby shelf, perhaps a representation of a deity, an animal, or a protective symbol. Its form is worn but deliberate, suggesting care in creation and placement. You sit on the edge of a platform, letting your legs dangle. The raised position gives a different perspective. You can see the central hearth's glow reflected across the walls, a soft amber wash uniting work, play, and rest. You imagine a family gathering here, a parent reading a story to children, a sibling adjusting a blanket for warmth, an elder quietly observing the household rhythms. The longhouse nurtures these moments, holding both public and private life in one seamless structure. A small bundle of textiles lies at the foot of another platform. Wool tunics, linen undergarments, and cloth wraps, meticulously folded. You notice subtle wear patterns, edges frayed, colors faded, signs of repeated handling. It is mundane, but alive. Fringe detail. Some evidence suggests families rotated and reused textiles in a deliberate pattern, possibly for ritual or superstitious reasons, or simply to maximize longevity. Historians still debate the intent behind these domestic routines. Near a corner, a simple wooden cradle rocks slightly under the faintest draft. Imagine a child resting here centuries ago, breathing softly, surrounded by the warmth of family, fire, and protective objects. The subtle motion, coupled with the ambient hum of the house, would have been hypnotic, a gentle rhythm of safety and continuity. You run your hand along the wall, feeling the uneven grain of timber. Tiny nails and pegs hint at previous additions hanging clothes, tools, or charms. Every mark tells a story of adaptation, repair, and care. These walls were not passive. They responded to human needs, evolving as life demanded. A soft creak beneath you makes you glance down. Perhaps it's the wood settling, or maybe a long-departed presence leaving a whisper of memory. You close your eyes briefly, listening. The house murmurs in low, comforting tones, the distant shuffle of animals, the hum of the hearth, the faint echo of voices long silenced. You notice a small carved piece of jewelry tucked near one platform. Amber beads threaded carefully, edges polished. Someone's personal talisman, perhaps worn nightly. The amber glows faintly in the firelight, connecting you to the sensory and spiritual life of those who rested here. You lean back, letting the quiet envelop you. In these private quarters, the longhouse reveals its tenderness. Here, survival intersects with care, utility with intimacy, routine with ritual. Every object, every texture, every faint scent carries significance beyond the immediate stories of sleep, rest, family bonds, and the gentle rhythms of domestic life. The longhouse hums softly around you, a living space of both protection and presence. Ahead lies a threshold, the doorway to another layer of history, where privacy, routine, and the unseen intertwine even further. You rise, sensing the pull forward, deeper into the whispered tales embedded in timber, straw, and firelight. You move carefully through the intimate sleeping quarters, feeling the subtle shift from private space to a slightly more communal, yet still personal, section of the longhouse. Here, life's smaller routines played out quietly. Someone mending a tunic in the corner, another person brushing straw from a sleeping platform, a child quietly threading beads into a necklace while listening to the rhythmic crackle of the hearth. The air is warm, faintly fragrant with herbs, and hums with the invisible echoes of daily life. A small table rests near the wall, rough-hewn but sturdy. On it lie simple implements: a bone awl, a wooden bowl, a small knife, and a bundle of thread. Each object speaks of countless repetitions, of labor intertwined with patience. Mainstream historical fact: Vikings relied heavily on multi-purpose tools for domestic tasks: spinning, sewing, carving, and even small repairs on sails or weapons. Their homes reflected this economy of design. Every object had multiple uses and every space served multiple functions. You crouch beside the table, tracing your fingers over the surfaces. The wooden bowl bears faint scorch marks, perhaps from holding hot liquids or resting too close to embers. You imagine someone scooping broth into it for a child, carefully balancing it to avoid spills, all while the wind howls outside and the hearth's fire keeps everyone warm. Fringe tidbit: some archaeologists suggest Viking households may have marked bowls with carved symbols to designate ownership or convey a household story, tiny inscriptions of identity hidden in plain sight. Historians still debate whether these markings were utilitarian, symbolic, or a mix of both. Across the room, a low bench sits under a small window. You rest your hand against it, feeling the smooth polish of countless hands. Children likely perched here, sharing whispered secrets, threading beads, or watching the occasional snowflake drift past the window. Perhaps an elder sat nearby, weaving or mending garments, silently guiding the younger ones without interruption, the longhouse walls absorbing every gesture and murmur. You notice a small bundle of dried flowers tucked into a corner of the window ledge. Their colors have faded over time, but you can almost imagine the subtle beauty they once lent to this quiet space. Vikings appreciated such small touches of domestic charm, even in survival-focused environments. Some scholars propose that these tiny decorations reinforced family identity, social cohesion, or even spiritual well-being. A faint creak makes you glance upward. A rafter shifts slightly, and for a moment, you imagine it as a sentinel of the house, silently observing centuries of life. The smoke from the hearth curls along its grain, carrying warmth and the faint scent of charred wood. You can almost hear the rhythm of past evenings, hushed conversations, the occasional laughter of a child, the soft tap of a needle against fabric, the whispered recitations of stories. Near the sleeping platforms, small personal items catch your eye: a carved wooden pendant, a few beads, a simple comb, and fragments of cloth. These were daily treasures, functional and ornamental, worn or used by someone who lived, laughed, and rested here. You lift a small pendant, its amber, polished smooth by fingers long gone. The warmth from your hand awakens its subtle glow. Quirky detail. Some pendants were believed to carry protective qualities, ensuring the sleeper was shielded from harm or bad dreams. Historians still debate whether such beliefs were widespread or confined to select households. A faint draft drifts through a crack in the wall, brushing against your neck. You imagine the family here adjusting their bedding, stacking extra hides, or piling straw to block the chill. Even in these private quarters, the longhouse was a living, breathing organism responding to wind, temperature, and human activity alike. You sit on one of the sleeping platforms, letting the warmth of the hearth seep into you. The quiet envelops you. The longhouse hums gently, its timbers contracting and expanding, its rafters whispering. The intimate space reveals the layers of daily life: sleep, rest, small chores, private reflection, and preparation for another long day or night. Every object, every texture, every scent carries the memory of a person who once occupied this space. You breathe slowly, feeling the rhythm of domestic life echo in your chest. This is where survival met comfort, where practical ingenuity intertwined with tenderness, and where the whispers of generations remained in the grain of the wood and the softness of straw. You rise gently, stepping toward the threshold that leads to the next area of the longhouse, the communal cooking and preparation zones that connect privacy with shared sustenance, ritual, and memory. The longhouse guides you onward, pulling you toward the ongoing story it quietly preserves. You leave the intimate sleeping quarters behind and enter a section of the longhouse where domestic work and communal sustenance overlap, a place where private labor merges seamlessly with the household's shared life. The air carries the familiar warmth of the hearth, though softened here by distance, and a subtle aroma of dried herbs and lingering smoke floats on the breeze. It's quieter than the central hearth, yet alive with echoes: the distant scrape of a knife, the faint shuffle of straw, and the gentle murmur of someone tending small chores. A low table dominates the space, rough-hewn but solid, scarred with countless marks from daily use. Mainstream historical fact: Viking longhouses often included such work tables, serving as hubs for food preparation, textile work, and minor repairs. Their size and position allowed multiple people to use them simultaneously, creating a shared rhythm of labor that strengthened household cohesion. You run your fingers across the wood, noting its uneven smoothness, worn by generations of hands, some strong and calloused, others delicate and precise. You notice a wooden bowl filled with dried fish flakes and grains. Someone long ago prepared them carefully, measuring portions, ensuring survival through long winters. Fringe detail. In some Viking households, small bowls were occasionally used in symbolic gestures offered to the fire or left in specific spots as protective charms. Historians still debate how common these ritualized food practices were, but the thought of an everyday object carrying hidden meaning delights you. A small basket rests under the table, brimming with roots, berries, and preserved vegetables. You can almost hear the hushed instructions exchanged here. Wash the roots carefully. Don't crush the berries. Imagine a child learning by watching a parent, absorbing rhythm, skill, and responsibility simultaneously. This is the quiet, repetitive labor that allowed families to thrive. Across the room, a spindle lies ready beside a half-finished ball of yarn. You lift it gently, feeling its balance, imagining the repetitive twirl as someone spun fibers into thread. This corner of the longhouse hums with unspoken coordination. One hand kneads, one hand threads, one hand stirs. Even in silence, the work is connected, synchronized, communal in its purpose. A faint scent of herbs draws your attention upward. A bundle of thyme and mugwort hangs from a peg, drying slowly in the gentle warmth. These herbs served multiple purposes: seasoning, medicine, and sometimes superstition. Quirky tidbit. Some accounts suggest Viking households tucked such bundles near food or sleeping areas to attract good fortune or ward off unwanted spirits. Historians still argue whether these were intentional charms or incidental household practices. You notice the arrangement of tools along the wall: knives, spoons, a small hand axe, and a few wooden ladles. Their placement is deliberate within easy reach for daily chores, yet out of the way enough to prevent accidents. Each tool carries both utility and memory, shaped by repeated contact. The longhouse absorbs these gestures, storing them in subtle echoes across floorboards and beams. A shallow wooden tray rests on the table, showing faint scorch marks along its edges. You imagine someone using it to mix grains, knead dough, or hold small offerings for family rituals. The marks are a tactile record of use, and you can almost hear the gentle scrape of utensils as meals were prepared centuries ago. You crouch near a small clay vessel tucked in a corner. It's simple but functional, probably holding water, milk, or preserved food. You lift it carefully, feeling the warmth of the sun-baked clay beneath your fingers. Imagine the quiet pride of someone handling it. Essential, sturdy, and wholly dependable. A fringe theory suggests that certain vessels were also used in small domestic ceremonies, pouring libations to ensure abundance. Historians still debate how widespread such practices were. You step back to take in the whole area. The rhythm of life here is subtle yet vivid: preparation, care, repetition, and silent coordination. Each object, scent, and sound contributes to a living memory of domestic resilience. You sense the invisible network of touch and attention: hands that chopped, kneaded, washed, and arranged; eyes that watched, guided, and learned; hearts that wove connection into the mundane acts of survival. The warmth of the hearth drifts further into this section, binding work and quiet community together. You breathe deeply, letting the mingled scents and textures settle in your chest. In this corner of the longhouse, survival, domesticity, and subtle ritual interlace, forming the invisible framework upon which everyday Viking life depended. Ahead lies another space, quieter still, where the longhouse holds memories not just of labor but of laughter, games, and shared human connection, a domain of lightheartedness and storytelling that complements the toil you've observed. You move forward, ready to hear the whispers of playful life embedded in these ancient timbers. You step forward into a part of the longhouse that hums differently: lighter, more playful, less regimented. The air carries hints of straw, faintly sweetened by scattered grains and the residual warmth from the hearth. But it also carries laughter, almost inaudible at first, echoing from the memories etched into the timbers. This is where daily life brushed against joy, a place for games, storytelling, and moments that flickered brighter than work or necessity. Your eyes catch small remnants: a carved wooden toy lying near a platform, slightly chewed by a goat long ago perhaps, or handled lovingly by a child. A carved disc with incised patterns, maybe a top or a simple board game piece, rests nearby. Mainstream historical fact: archaeologists have found miniature tools, toy weapons, and game pieces in longhouse sites, indicating that children and adults engaged in structured play or skill-based games to pass time, teach dexterity, or bond socially. You squat to examine a tiny wooden figurine, roughly shaped but carefully polished. Perhaps it was a small warrior or a farm animal, once carried in a child's pocket or tucked under a pillow. Fringe tidbit: Some scholars theorize Viking toys doubled as miniature ritual objects, helping children familiarize themselves with cultural myths, legends, or even the practical skills they would need as adults. Historians still argue how intentional these overlaps were. A faint giggle seems to drift on the air, your imagination perhaps, or the longhouse sharing the echoes of centuries past. You picture a child rolling a small hoop across the floor, a sibling chasing it, and a parent supervising from a bench, all while the fire crackled in the center. The rhythms of work, ritual, and play intermingled seamlessly in these spaces. You notice a shallow pit filled with straw near the wall, perhaps a makeshift play area or a storage spot for small objects. The straw is faintly sweet, carrying the faint warmth of the livestock section, reminding you that the house's boundaries were fluid. Play, work, rest, and ritual overlapped, flowing into one another with subtle grace. A small wooden puzzle lies on a low shelf, simple interlocking pieces, worn smooth. You pick one up, tracing the edges. Imagine a child learning strategy, patience, and dexterity, or an adult using it for a brief mental diversion after a day of toil. Play was not frivolous. It honed skills and reinforced social bonds. Above, the rafters are lower here, leaning gently inward, creating a cocooning effect. Shadows flicker across the walls, cast by the central hearth and perhaps a small candle or oil lamp. You imagine an elder telling a story, dramatic gestures, voices rising and falling, children wide-eyed and gasping at imaginary monsters or heroes. The longhouse absorbs the cadence of these stories, retaining their essence in timber and smoke. A quirky detail emerges. Some Viking games were competitive, involving counting sticks, dice, or strategic placement of pieces on carved boards. Evidence suggests that both children and adults participated, sometimes using game outcomes to settle disputes, reinforce hierarchy, or pass the time during long winters. Historians still debate the extent to which games influenced social structure versus pure amusement. You notice a faint indentation along the floor, likely from repeated movement during play. You step carefully over it, imagining countless runs, spins, and leaps that have occurred here. Even small slips, stumbles, and laughter are embedded in the house's memory, layered with centuries of domestic activity. A small bundle of cloth lies nearby, perhaps a doll's outfit or protective covering for a toy. You run your fingers over it, noting the soft but slightly rough texture. Someone carefully folded this fabric, setting it aside with purpose, attention to detail that turns even play into an act of care. You hear, in your mind, the rhythmic shuffle of hooves and laughter blending the livestock's warmth, the household's breath, children's voices, adults' guidance. It is almost musical, a quiet symphony of everyday life, gentle yet persistent. You rise slowly, brushing straw from your clothing, and glance around. The space feels alive not because of grand gestures, but because of these small, intimate echoes of play, story, and joy. Here, in this corner of the longhouse, survival was tempered with delight, labor punctuated with laughter, and routine woven into moments of gentle human connection. A fine draft brushed past, urging you onward. Ahead lie spaces where families prepared for sleep, where ritual and domesticity meet again, and where the longhouse's intimate heart beats most subtly. The layered zones of personal care, preparation, and quiet reflection. You follow the gentle pull, ready to explore the final domestic whispers before night fully descends. You step away from the playful corner and approach the areas where preparation for rest and nighttime routines quietly unfold. The air grows slightly cooler here, tinged with the earthy scent of straw and softened by residual warmth from the central hearth. The longhouse seems to pause, as if acknowledging that the day's activities are winding down. Your footsteps are muffled on the worn wooden floorboards, which have been polished smooth by generations of careful movement. Small benches and low shelves line the walls, holding objects for nightly rituals and practical preparation. Mainstream historical fact. Viking households often maintained carefully organized zones for sleep and personal hygiene, keeping tools and small objects within reach to simplify evening routines. You notice a wooden comb, a small bowl, and a bundle of herbs, a domestic toolkit designed for comfort, protection, and order. You kneel beside a narrow bench, brushing your fingers across a small, carved box. Inside, you imagine tiny treasures, threads, beads, or personal charms kept close for both sentimental and practical reasons. Fringe tidbit. Some Viking households may have included charms specifically for sleep tiny talismans meant to ward off nightmares or encourage rest. Historians still debate whether these were widely used or localized to specific families or regions. A faint, lingering aroma of dried flowers and herbs drifts from a peg above the bench. Lavender wasn't native, but yarrow, juniper, and mugwort often appeared in longhouse bedding or small bundles placed near sleeping areas. These scents, combined with warmth and soft straw, created a sensory cocoon designed to encourage calm and relaxation. You examine a low sleeping platform layered with hides and straw. You run a hand along the surface, feeling the dents and grooves left by centuries of bodies at rest. This isn't merely a sleeping spot, it's a record of daily life. The subtle impressions of generations form a tactile history, telling of small routines, restless nights, and quiet moments of reflection. A small bundle of textiles lies at the foot of another platform. You imagine the care taken in folding and arranging them each night. Wool tunics, linen undergarments, and bedding were managed with precision to retain warmth and comfort. A quirky detail surfaces. Evidence suggests some families alternated bedding and clothing according to ritual cycles or seasonal patterns, a subtle intersection of domesticity and belief. Historians still debate the extent to which these routines carried symbolic meaning versus practical necessity. Nearby, a low clay vessel rests quietly, likely holding water for washing or small domestic needs. Its surface is warm to the touch, polished by repeated handling. You lift it gently, imagining a parent washing hands before bed, a child brushing teeth, or the Viking equivalent, perhaps rinsing with cool water while recounting the day's events. Each small act embodies the rhythm of domestic care. You notice a spindle whirl tucked beside a platform, a reminder that the day's labor never fully ceased. Even as people prepared for sleep, spinning, weaving, and mending often continued quietly by candlelight. The whirl is smooth, balanced, and clearly used repeatedly, an echo of skill, patience, and continuity. Above, the rafters bend slightly, smoke darkened yet protective, framing the space in a gentle, intimate way. Shadows flicker softly across the platforms, creating patches of light and dark where subtle rituals might have taken place, arranging bedding, offering a small token to a deity, or simply sitting in thought. You settle briefly on one of the platforms, feeling the softness of layered straw and hides. The longhouse hums around you, the distant echoes of play, work, and preparation blending into a quiet lullaby. Every surface, every tool, every smell carries the imprint of human intention, care, and continuity. A faint whisper of movement draws your attention to a small bundle of herbs hanging near the platform. Juniper, mugwort, and yarrow, their scents soothing. Perhaps they were tucked under pillows or near blankets, a gentle protective gesture before sleep. You breathe slowly, letting the layered aromas and textures lull your mind. The longhouse seems to settle with you, every timber and floorboard holding memory, every shadow carrying history. Here, in these quiet corners of preparation, the balance between survival, domestic care, and ritual becomes apparent. It's a rhythm of continuity, intimacy, and subtle guidance, a foundation for both rest and renewal. Ahead lies the final stretch of personal, reflective spaces, corners where ritual, memory, and family life converge in preparation for night. You rise, ready to follow the longhouse to its softest, most intimate whispers. You step further into the longhouse, entering the quietest, most intimate zones where reflection, ritual, and the end-of-day routines intertwine. The warmth from the central hearth drifts gently into the space, mingling with the earthy aroma of straw and the subtle scent of lingering herbs. Every breath seems to carry centuries of quiet gestures, folding textiles, arranging bedding, whispering protective words, and soft lullabies. Low platforms line the walls, each carefully layered with straw, hides, and woven mats. Mainstream historical fact: raised sleeping platforms not only provided warmth but also offered a sense of personal territory within the shared space, allowing individuals small domains of privacy in an otherwise communal environment. You kneel, running a hand over the straw, feeling the subtle impressions of bodies long past small dips and grooves formed by repeated use, a tactile history of sleep, rest, and repose. A small carved box rests beside one platform. Its contents tiny beads, threads, and perhaps a personal charm suggest an intersection of practicality and personal expression. Fringe tidbit: some Viking households included small protective objects specifically meant to be kept close during sleep, from amber amulets to carved wooden symbols. Historians still debate how widespread these practices were, but the careful placement of such items underscores the blend of domesticity and ritual in everyday life. Near a low bench, you notice a bundle of dried herbs hanging from a peg. Juniper, yarrow, and mugwort release a soft, soothing scent intended to calm, protect, and refresh. Imagine a mother gently brushing the herbs across a child's bedding, or an elder placing them near their own pillow while reciting a quiet prayer for protection. These small acts, unnoticed by outsiders, form a ritualized cadence of care and intention. A faint indentation in the platform suggests someone rested here repeatedly in the same posture, perhaps a child or adult who sought comfort in familiar gestures before sleep. You sit for a moment, tracing the grooves, imagining the gentle sway of rest, the quiet exhalations of a household winding down, and the soft murmurs of whispered storytelling or prayers. A low clay vessel sits in the corner, perhaps for water or a small ritual offering. Its surface is warm, polished, smooth by repeated handling. You lift it, imagining hands washing or pouring in preparation for rest. Every object here carries layers of purpose: utility, care, and symbolic weight. The rafters above bend slightly inward, enclosing the space like a gentle cocoon. The shadows play softly across walls and platforms, creating quiet pockets where personal reflection and ritual could occur. Fringe detail: some scholars suggest that tiny carvings or scratches on walls and beams were intended to guide sleep, mark the passage of nights, or offer protection. Historians still debate whether such markings were intentional or incidental traces of daily life. A small spindle rests beside a sleeping platform, a reminder that even in preparation for rest, domestic labor persisted. Spinning, mending, and quiet handiwork were often evening tasks, performed in silence or in the soft murmur of family conversation. You pick it up, feeling its balance and weight, a tool honed over countless generations, linking skill, patience, and mindfulness. Near the hearthlight's faint reach, you notice tiny fragments of cloth, a doll's tunic, or a child's simple playthings tucked near the sleeping area. Their presence suggests the merging of care, domesticity, and play, even as night approached. You smile, imagining children adjusting their small possessions, ensuring comfort alongside practical preparation. You breathe slowly, letting the warmth, the scents, and the quiet rhythm settle around you. The Longhouse, in this intimate section, is a living record of human care, quiet rituals, and the interweaving of practicality and personal expression. Each platform, each object, each faint indentation carries memory of rest, of intention, of life quietly lived. Ahead lies the final domestic spaces, where evening transitions into night, where families rested fully, and where the Longhouse's rhythm reaches its most tender, whispering cadence. You rise, guided by centuries of soft, intimate echoes, ready to explore the threshold between wakefulness and the Longhouse's nocturnal memory. You step into the final domestic threshold of the Longhouse, where the day's labors, rituals, and routines converge into quiet anticipation of night. The air is cooler here, carrying the soft mingling of straw, faint smoke, and lingering herbs. Every breath seems saturated with centuries of intimate gestures, folded textiles, whispered prayers, careful placement of objects, and the gentle hum of familial presence. You notice how the light from the central hearth fades gradually, casting long, warm shadows that cradle each platform and corner. Your eyes drift over the sleeping areas, now softly illuminated. Raised platforms hold the evidence of daily life. Straw compressed by countless nights of rest, hides carefully arranged, and subtle grooves tracing the paths of movement and comfort. Mainstream historical fact. Vikings used layered bedding and hides to retain warmth and establish personal territories within the communal space, a delicate balance between privacy and shared living. You kneel beside a platform, brushing your fingers over the straw, feeling the tactile imprint of generations who slept, dreamed, and rested here. A small carved box rests quietly nearby, its lid polished smooth by repeated handling. Inside, you imagine tiny tokens, beads, threads, a protective charm, perhaps a small figurine. Fringe detail. Some Viking households reportedly used such objects in nightly rituals, placing them near the sleeper for protection or blessing. Historians still debate whether these were widespread practices or the result of regional variations, but their presence in excavations hints at the intimate intersection of domestic care and spiritual belief. You inhale faint herbal scents drifting from bundles of dried plants hanging from pegs, juniper, yarrow, and mugwort. The smell is grounding, gentle, and calming. Perhaps someone brushed these herbs across bedding before sleep, or tucked them near a child's pillow to ward off bad dreams. Such small gestures reveal the depth of domestic mindfulness, blending care, superstition, and practical action in one seamless routine. A shallow clay vessel sits in a corner, warm and smooth. You lift it, imagining water poured carefully for washing hands, rinsing small tools, or performing minor nightly rites. Every object here carries layered purpose, functional, emotional, and symbolic. You notice a low spindle nearby, an echo of continued work even at day's end. Spinning and mending were quiet evening rituals that maintained both skill and household order. Along the floor, subtle depressions mark where children played briefly before sleep or where adults rested momentarily. These faint impressions, unnoticed in daily life, preserve centuries of intimate movement, pauses, and gentle interactions. A tiny carved figurine sits tucked beside one platform, perhaps a guardian symbol, a playful object, or a sentimental token. The Longhouse holds these traces silently, offering them to anyone willing to notice. Above, the rafters curve slightly inward, forming a protective cocoon. Shadows flicker softly from the hearth, casting irregular patterns across walls, platforms, and objects. You imagine family members moving quietly here, arranging bedding, smoothing hides, whispering final words of care, or performing small protective rituals before settling down. Fringe evidence suggests these subtle nocturnal routines reinforced family cohesion, comfort, and security. Historians still argue whether they were intentional symbolic acts or simply the practical outcome of caring for household members. You settle onto a low platform, feeling the warmth of layered straw and hides. The longhouse hums softly, its timber walls breathing with centuries of activity and memory. Every scent, groove, and object is alive with story, preparation for sleep, domestic attentiveness, care, ritual, and the quiet rhythm of survival. In this final domestic threshold, the longhouse embodies intimacy, continuity, and protection. Here, night approaches not as an end, but as a gentle transition, where daily life softens into rest and the accumulated care of generations hums quietly around you. You rise, sensing the final whispering stretch toward the very heart of the house, the central hearth, the pulse that has connected work, ritual, play, and rest across centuries. You step closer to the central hearth, the heart of the longhouse, where all aspects of daily life, work, rest, play, and ritual intertwine in a warm, amber glow. The firelight flickers across the walls, casting moving shadows that seem almost alive, stretching and bending as though whispering stories of centuries past. This is the pulse of the home, the connective tissue binding every corner, every platform, every human gesture that has passed through these timbers. Your fingers brush over the edge of the hearth, feeling residual warmth from countless fires that have burned here. Mainstream historical fact: the central hearth was the primary heat source for Viking longhouses, strategically placed to radiate warmth across sleeping platforms, work areas, and livestock sections. Smoke escaped through the roof, but not without leaving a patina of soot that now tells silent stories of countless evenings. You notice small iron hooks above the hearth, remnants of cooking implements and hanging pots. Someone long ago arranged them carefully, balancing utility with accessibility. Fringe detail: some evidence suggests that certain items hung above the hearth were symbolic, serving as offerings to deities or protective charms, blending the practical and spiritual. Historians still debate how widespread such practices were versus being localized household traditions. You settle on a low bench facing the hearth, inhaling the familiar scent of smoke, wood, and lingering herbs. Imagine a parent stirring a simmering stew while children play nearby, the eldest spinning fibers, a weaving loom quietly humming its rhythm. Even in the dim light, each gesture carries intention: to nurture, to sustain, to comfort. Across the hearth, a shallow bowl holds small remnants: grains, dried berries, perhaps a symbolic offering. These simple objects remind you that the hearth was more than a source of heat and light. It was the spiritual and social center of the house. Quirky tidbit: some households may have used small hearth offerings to ensure luck in journeys or protection from misfortune. Historians still argue whether such acts were primarily symbolic or deeply integrated into daily survival routines. Your gaze drifts to the rafters above, smoke darkened and sagging slightly under centuries of use. Tiny carvings and scratches mark them a silent record of domestic life. Perhaps a child carved initials, perhaps an adult made marks to count days or track ritual cycles. Every mark is a whisper of the people who moved through this space, leaving tactile echoes in timber and smoke. A soft murmur seems to fill the hearth area, an imagined blend of voices from centuries past. Perhaps someone recited a prayer, a lullaby, or a simple recounting of the day. The longhouse absorbs it all, preserving rhythm and tone in subtle vibrations that you can almost feel against your skin. Nearby, a small pile of firewood rests ready for the evening. Each piece has been carefully selected and split, evidence of daily care and planning. The act of tending the hearth was a ritual in itself, requiring skill, patience, and attentiveness. Fringe evidence hints that some families incorporated small gestures, placing a specific piece of wood just so as a protective or symbolic practice. Historians still debate whether these were widespread superstitions or intimate family traditions. You run a hand over the edge of the hearth, imagining centuries of meals, gatherings, and quiet reflection. The warmth spreads to your chest, a literal and figurative connection to all who have rested, worked, played, and prayed here. Every detail of the longhouse, from sleeping platforms to the central fire, resonates with continuity and care. The hearth glows steadily, a pulse that links every section you've explored so far. Work, domestic care, play, personal ritual, sleep all converge here, vibrating in unison. You close your eyes, breathing deeply, letting the scent, warmth, and echoes wrap around you like a blanket. Ahead lies the threshold where the longhouse transitions fully into night, the final spaces of memory, ritual, and rest, where time slows and the whispers of centuries settle into the quiet pulse of the house. You rise, ready to follow the hearth's call into the nocturnal heart of Viking domestic life. You linger near the hearth, feeling its steady warmth radiate through the longhouse, and notice how shadows pool in corners where the light barely reaches. This is the liminal space between wakefulness and sleep, where the longhouse holds its breath and whispers softly to anyone willing to listen. The air carries the scent of smoldering wood, dried herbs, and faint traces of last evening's meal, a subtle reminder of continuity. Your hand grazes the floor, tracing grooves worn smooth by countless feet moving between work, rest, and ritual. Mainstream historical fact: Viking longhouses were designed to maximize functionality and airflow, yet the central hearth remained the core physically, socially, and spiritually, providing warmth, light, and a focal point for family interaction. The placement of platforms, benches, and storage was deliberate, creating flow and hierarchy without rigid separation. You notice small talismans tucked near sleeping platforms, carved wooden animals, bits of amber, tiny woven charms. Fringe detail: some evidence suggests these were positioned intentionally to protect sleepers, attract good fortune, or guide dreams. Historians still debate whether these rituals were widespread or confined to specific regions, but their placement underscores the subtle integration of spirituality and domestic care. Across the room, a shallow clay vessel holds water, its surface cool and smooth. Imagine a parent offering a sip to a child before bed, or an elder quietly rinsing hands after a long day of chores. Even the simplest actions carry meaning: preparation, care, and attentiveness folded into a nightly rhythm that is echoed through generations. You crouch near a bundle of dried herbs hanging from a low peg. The aroma is grounding, calming, a sensory lullaby. Perhaps someone brushed the herbs across bedding, whispered protective words, or allowed their scent to mingle with that of the sleeping straw. The combination of smell, texture, and warmth transforms this space into a cocoon, a deliberate environment for rest. A small spindle whorl rests nearby, evidence that domestic labor often continued even as night approached. Spinning, weaving, and mending were performed quietly by candlelight or near the residual glow of the hearth. These tasks were functional, yet meditative, an act of care for the household and a reinforcement of routine. Quirky tidbit: some researchers propose that quiet evening labor also functioned as a subtle mental rehearsal for daily problem-solving or storytelling. Historians still debate the cognitive or ritual significance of these nocturnal tasks. You notice the rafters above, smoke-darkened and slightly sagging, framing the space like a protective canopy. Tiny scratches and carvings mark the beams, remnants of both children's games and adults' subtle rituals. Each mark is a whispered memory, a tangible echo of human presence that has persisted across centuries. A soft flicker of light reflects off a small amber bead tucked beside a platform. Its glow reminds you that even amidst utilitarian objects, there were moments of beauty, care, and personal significance. Vikings valued these small details, weaving intention and attention into the ordinary. You sit quietly, letting the warmth, scents, and faint echoes settle around you. The hearth hums like a living thing, connecting all corners of the longhouse, linking work, play, domestic care, ritual, and rest. Here, in the threshold before night fully descends, the longhouse whispers its most intimate stories: continuity, protection, and the subtle rhythm of life carried across generations. Ahead, the final section awaits, where the longhouse softens completely into night, memory, and sleep, and where the accumulated care, warmth, and ritual of centuries fold gently into quiet darkness. You rise, preparing to follow this final, gentle pulse. You step fully into the longhouse's nocturnal heart, where the echoes of activity have softened into hushed whispers of memory. The warmth from the central hearth stretches across the room, mingling with the faint chill of the night outside. Shadows stretch long and slow, folding over the sleeping platforms and low benches, brushing against walls darkened with soot and time. Here, the house exhales, and you feel its rhythm as a gentle, living pulse. Your eyes drift over the sleeping platforms, each layered with straw and hides, worn smooth by centuries of nightly rest. Mainstream historical fact: Raised sleeping areas not only insulated from cold floors, but allowed families to claim small personal territories within communal space, giving each individual a subtle sense of privacy and security. You kneel beside one platform, brushing a hand across the straw, feeling centuries of subtle imprints left by bodies, movements, and quiet gestures of care. A small carved box rests near the platform, its wood warm from handling. Inside, you imagine beads, threads, a protective charm, or a keepsake. Fringe tidbit. Some Viking households used small personal talismans to guide dreams or protect against misfortune. Historians still argue whether these items were largely symbolic, practical, or a blend of both, but their careful placement in sleeping areas suggests intentionality. A faint scent of dried herbs drifts from a peg above the platform. Juniper, mugwort, and yarrow mingle, creating a sensory lullaby. Perhaps someone brushed them across a child's bedding, whispered protective words, or allowed their aroma to blend with straw and hides, calming restless minds. You inhale slowly, letting the fragrance anchor the moment, creating a sense of peace. Near the hearth, small clay vessels sit quietly, remnants of water, milk, or evening offerings. Each is smoothed by repeated handling, an intimate record of daily care. You lift one carefully, imagining hands washing before sleep, preparing a small offering, or gently tending to a child. Every motion is deliberate, rhythmic, and protective, a choreography repeated across generations. You notice tiny scratches and marks on the rafters above, evidence of children's play, ritual, or perhaps symbolic acts by adults. These small inscriptions are whispers in timber, silent yet present. Fringe evidence suggests some carvings were intended to mark cycles of time, track ritual practices, or protect household members. Historians still debate their original significance, but they undeniably carry memory forward. A low spindle rests beside one of the platforms, its polished surface glinting faintly in the hearthlight. Even as night approached, spinning and weaving continued quietly, a meditative practice, a reinforcement of skill, and a subtle act of care. You lift it, feeling the weight and balance, imagining someone using it while reflecting on the day, soothing the household into calm. The hearth glows steadily, a pulse that binds every corner. Workspaces, domestic sections, playful nooks, and private sleeping platforms. Here, labor, care, ritual, and rest converge, creating a rhythm that is both tangible and ephemeral. Every scent, sound, and texture carries memory, intention, and continuity. You settle onto a platform, allowing the straw and hides to cradle you. The house hums gently around you, vibrating with centuries of presence. It is a rhythm of survival softened by care, of work and ritual intertwined with intimacy, of small gestures that together form the heartbeat of human life. You close your eyes and feel yourself drawn into this pulse, connected to all who have rested here before. Ahead, only the wind down remains, a slow, gentle descent into full night where the longhouse exhales fully and you linger with the accumulated memory, warmth, and whispers of centuries. You sink deeper into the quiet, feeling the warmth of the hearth pulse softly through the longhouse. Shadows pool in the corners, merging with faint glimmers of amber light reflecting off worn surfaces. The house seems to exhale around you, a slow, measured rhythm that mirrors your own heartbeat. Here, in the threshold of night, every object, scent, and texture carries echoes of centuries' tiny acts of care, whispered stories, and subtle rituals folded into the domestic rhythm. You run a hand along a sleeping platform, tracing grooves formed by generations of nightly rest. Mainstream historical fact: raised sleeping platforms were key in Viking homes for both warmth and hygiene, creating personal space within communal living. You feel the straw beneath your fingers, compressed by countless bodies, each dip a quiet signature of human presence. Nearby, a small carved box rests, its surface worn smooth. Inside, you imagine beads, threads, or a protective charm tucked carefully each night. Fringe tidbit: some Viking households reportedly kept these talismans near sleepers to guard against nightmares or misfortune. Historians still debate whether such practices were symbolic, widespread, or deeply personal, but the careful placement of objects reflects intention and domestic mindfulness. A faint aroma of dried herbs drifts from the rafters, juniper, yarrow, and mugwort blending subtly with the lingering smoke. You inhale slowly, letting the scent settle, a quiet lullaby carried across time. Perhaps someone brushed the herbs across bedding, whispered protective words, or simply arranged them to comfort loved ones. The aroma transforms the space into a cocoon, a sensory guide toward rest. You notice small clay vessels beside the hearth, holding water, milk, or remnants of evening offerings. Their smooth, warm surfaces hint at careful handling over years, echoing domestic attention and ritualized care. You lift one, imagining a gentle gesture, washing hands, pouring a small libation, preparing a child for sleep. The rafters above bear tiny scratches and carvings, echoes of children's play, symbolic acts, or simple record-keeping. Fringe evidence suggests these marks sometimes guided ritual or marked time cycles. Historians still debate their intent, yet the signs reveal continuity, personal expression, and memory etched into the home's very fabric. A low spindle rests quietly on a platform, polished from use. Even at night, weaving and mending continued a gentle meditation, a reinforcement of household rhythm. You feel its balance, imagining fingers spinning thread as stories and care float alongside each motion. You lean back, letting the straw and hides envelop you. The hearth hums softly, shadows dancing across walls, objects, and timbers. Play, labor, ritual, and rest converge here into one seamless current, a pulse of human presence that bridges centuries. The longhouse whispers to you now in its purest form, a soft, continuous memory, a tender rhythm of survival, care, and domestic life. Every creak, scent, and shadow is a story folded into timber and straw, waiting for you to breathe it in. You close your eyes, allowing the accumulated warmth, protection, and quiet intimacy to settle around you like a gentle blanket. You sink fully into the warmth of the longhouse, letting the hearth's amber glow and the faint scent of herbs envelop your senses. The shadows stretch long, softening edges, and the subtle hum of timber, straw, and centuries of memory wraps around you like a gentle blanket. Here, the longhouse breathes slowly, holding the accumulated whispers of survival, care, play, and ritual. And you are part of its quiet pulse. Your fingers brush the worn straw of a sleeping platform, feeling the indentations left by countless bodies over generations. Mainstream historical fact: raised platforms insulated sleepers from cold and damp, while subtly marking personal territory in communal spaces. Each groove, dip, and worn spot is a tactile record of human presence, a quiet story of rest and intimacy. A small carved box rests nearby, its lid polished smooth. Inside, you imagine tiny tokens, beads, threads, charms, perhaps a protective figurine. Fringe tidbit: some Viking households place such objects near sleepers to ward off bad dreams or misfortune. Historians still debate whether these practices were symbolic, ritualistic, or simply practical, but their careful positioning reflects intention and domestic mindfulness. Dried herbs hang from a peg above, their scents, juniper, yarrow, mugwort, mingling with smoke and straw. You inhale slowly, letting the fragrance guide your breath, soothing the body and quieting the mind. Perhaps someone brushed the herbs across bedding, whispered a protective word, or simply arranged them to bring calm. These small gestures transformed a simple domestic space into a sanctuary of care and ritual. Nearby, clay vessels rest quietly, smooth and warm, evidence of centuries of careful handling. You lift one, imagining water poured for washing, a minor ritual, or a quiet act of care for a child or elder. Each movement, each touch, reinforce the rhythm of daily life, blending practical necessity with intimate attention. Above, rafters sag slightly, smoke darkened and carved with faint scratches and marks. Children played, adults left symbolic gestures, or perhaps someone counted nights and seasons. Fringe evidence suggests these marks sometimes guided ritual or marked time cycles. Historians still debate their original purpose, yet their presence reflects continuity and personal expression. A low spindle rests on a nearby platform, its surface worn smooth from evening labor. Spinning and weaving continued even as night approached, a quiet meditation and reinforcement of domestic rhythm. You imagine fingers moving gently, threading stories, skills, and care into the fabric of household life. You settle fully, letting straw and hides embrace you. The hearth hums softly, the shadows dance, and the longhouse breathes around you. Play, labor, ritual, and rest converge here, a pulse that bridges centuries. Every sound, scent, and texture carries memory, care, and intention. The house whispers its final tales, soft, patient, and continuous. The longhouse has held generations of life, survival, and intimate gestures, and now you carry a piece of that quiet memory within yourself. Let the warmth, protection, and gentle rhythm settle in your chest, easing you toward night, rest, and dreams filled with timber, straw, and flickering hearthlight. You close your eyes, letting the longhouse's pulse slow to a gentle hum. The warmth of the hearth spreads, mingling with the soft scent of herbs and the quiet impressions of straw and hides. Every surface seems to breathe with memory. The subtle grooves of bodies at rest, the faint scratches of playful fingers, the polished edges of cherished tools. You feel the presence of those who have moved through these spaces, not as ghosts, but as whispers folded gently into timber, straw, and smoke. The rhythm of the house encourages your own breathing to deepen, slow, and soften. Tiny details, the scent of juniper, the curve of a worn platform, the quiet flicker of imagined firelight invite reflection, calm, and a subtle awareness of continuity. Time feels elastic here, stretching softly between centuries, folding your own presence into a rhythm measured not by hours, but by care, attention, and lived experience. You imagine small gestures, a parent brushing herbs across a child's bedding, a spindle whirling silently in a corner, a child resting quietly with a tiny toy tucked close. Each act, ordinary yet intimate, resonates across the longhouse, connecting work, ritual, play, and rest. In this gentle archive, survival and tenderness coexist, woven together in patterns of domestic attentiveness. As your body relaxes, the longhouse hums a lullaby only you can hear. Shadows soften further, scents deepen, and the warmth of layered straw and hides embraces you fully. You are carried into a quiet world where centuries of care and memory converge, where the pulse of human life slows into restful presence, and where every whisper of timber and hearthlight speaks of continuity, protection, and gentle intimacy. Let your mind drift with the longhouse, your breath in sync with its steady pulse, and sink into dreams cradled by history, warmth, and the quiet murmur of life well lived.